Hi guys, and welcome to Boring History Secrets channel. Tonight we step into the slow dusty rhythm of the Old West, where the sun feels less like light and more like a presence pressing gently but persistently against your skin. You wake before dawn not because you want to, but because you have to. Out here, survival isn't dramatic. It's quiet. It's routine. It's knowing exactly when the heat will rise and how it will try to wear you down. Have you ever wondered how cowboys manage to ride for hours under a sky that never seemed to blink with little water and even less shade? Or what it actually felt like long before air conditioning when the desert decided the rules? So before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and if you're listening somewhere in the world right now, go ahead and drop your location and local time in the comments. Now dim the lights, and you find yourself lying on a rough wool blanket, the ground beneath you, still holding a faint memory of yesterday's heat. The air is cool, almost surprisingly so, brushing softly across your face with a dryness that feels clean rather than harsh. For a brief moment before the sun rises, the desert feels almost kind. You hear it first. A distant shuffle of hooves, leather creaking as someone shifts in the half-dark. The low murmur of another cowboy, already awake, his voice steady and unhurried. You sit up, slowly brushing a thin layer of dust from your sleeve, and notice how the sky stretches wide and empty above you. Stars still linger, though they're fading. Now, retreating from the pale light building along the horizon. This is the hour that matters most. Cowboys in the American West often began their day before sunrise, not out of preference, but necessity. The heat that would come later was not something you fought directly. It was something you avoided, sidestepped, respected, like a silent agreement between you and the land. You reach for your boots, stiff with yesterday's sweat and dust, and pull them on with practiced ease. The leather feels cool at first, but you know it won't stay that way for long. Nothing does. Nearby, a coffee pot hangs over a small fire, the smoke rising in thin, lazy strands. It smells bitter, strong, and strangely comforting. Someone hands you a tin cup without a word. You take it, feeling the warmth seep into your fingers. There's no rush in the movement around you, but there is purpose. Every action is measured, efficient, almost instinctive. Saddles are checked, straps are tightened. Horses are approached with quiet familiarity. The animals shift and snort softly, their breath visible in the cool air. They know this routine too. Interestingly, many cowboys preferred this early morning calm not just for the temperature, but for the behavior of the cattle. In the cooler hours, herds were easier to manage, less restless, less likely to scatter. It's a small advantage, but out here small advantages matter. You walk toward your horse, running your hand along its neck. The hide is smooth but slightly damp, carrying the faint earthy smell of animal and dust. The horse turns its head, just slightly acknowledging you. There is a quiet partnership here, built not on affection exactly, but on mutual dependence. Historians still debate how much formal training most cowboys actually received before hitting the trail. Some argue many learned it on the job, absorbing skills through observation rather than instruction. Others suggest a more structured passing down of knowledge, especially in larger cattle operations. Either way, by the time you're out here, you either adapt quickly or you don't last long. The sky begins to shift. Soft blue replaces black. The horizon glows faintly gold. You swing yourself into the saddle, adjusting your weight as the horse settles beneath you. The leather creaks again, a familiar sound that seems to echo across the open land. Around you, others are doing the same, forming a loose line as the herd begins to stir. Dust lifts gently into the air as hooves move. It's not yet the choking cloud it will become later in the day. For now, it hangs lightly, catching the early light in a soft haze. There's a stillness to this moment, a fragile kind of balance. You can almost forget what's coming, but the desert doesn't forget. Even now, as the air feels cool against your skin, you can sense the dryness beneath it. The ground is hard, cracked in places, carrying the faint scent of baked earth. There is no dew here, no lingering moisture from the night. Whatever coolness exists is temporary borrowed time before the sun claims everything again. A cowboy near you adjusts his hat, pulling it lower over his eyes. It's a small gesture, but it signals the shift. The day has begun. You guide your horse forward, following the slow movement of the herd. The cattle make low, steady sounds, their bodies brushing against each other in a constant shifting mass. The rhythm of their movement becomes your rhythm too, step by step, breath by breath. As the sun finally breaks over the horizon, the light arrives quickly, almost abruptly. It spills across the land in long golden streaks, illuminating every ridge and dip in the terrain. The temperature begins to rise almost immediately, subtle at first, then steadily more noticeable. You feel it on your face, on your hands. A quiet warning. Cowboys understood this progression intimately. The heat didn't simply appear at midday. It built gradually, layer by layer, hour by hour. And if you paid attention, you could work with it instead of against it. That's why the day begins now. You shift in the saddle, settling into a more comfortable position as the ride continues. The leather warms beneath you, the air losing its earlier chill. Around you, the sounds of the waking land grow more defined. Insects begin their steady hum. Birds call out briefly before disappearing into the distance. There's no shade to speak of, no shelter waiting ahead, only open land stretching endlessly in every direction. And yet there's a strange calm in it, a quiet acceptance. You're not here to conquer the desert. That would be a foolish idea. You're here to move through it carefully, attentively, learning its patterns the way you might learn the habits of a living thing. Some cowboys even developed personal rituals tied to these early hours, small habits that gave structure to an otherwise unpredictable life. A certain way of tying a knot, a specific order of checking gear, little anchors of consistency in a landscape that offered very little. The sun climbs higher, the light sharpens, shadows shorten, and just like that, the brief kindness of morning begins to fade. But you're already prepared, because out here, surviving the heat doesn't start when the sun is at its worst. It starts long before that, in the quiet, cool moments just after waking, in the choices you make before the day truly begins, in the understanding that every degree of temperature, every drop of water, every hour of effort must be carefully balanced. You glance once more at the horizon, now bright and unrelenting, and feel the first real weight of the day settling in. It's coming, slowly, inevitably, and you ride forward to meet it. The sun hasn't fully taken hold yet, but you can already feel its intention pressing lightly against your shoulders as the morning stretches forward. The coolness from the earlier fades into thin layers, replaced by a dry, fun warmth that settles into your clothes and skin. You shift slightly in the saddle, becoming more aware of what you're wearing. It seems like too much at first. Too heavy, too warm. A long-sleeve shirt clings lightly to your arms, woven from cotton that feels both soft and stubborn. Over it, a vest adds another layer, trapping air close to your body. Your trousers are thick, durable, brushing roughly against your legs with every movement of the horse. Nothing about this outfit feels suited for heat, and yet it is. Cowboys rarely wore minimal clothing even under punishing desert sun. Instead, they relied on layers, cotton, wool, sometimes even canvas to create a barrier between their skin and the environment. It sounds counterintuitive, but bare skin exposed directly to the sunburns quickly loses moisture faster and becomes far more vulnerable to heat exhaustion. You tug slightly at your sleeve, letting a bit of air circulate underneath. The fabric lifts just enough to allow a faint breeze to pass through, carrying with it the dusty scent of the trail. It's subtle, but you notice the difference. That's the trick. Loose layered clothing doesn't trap heat the way you might expect. It creates a small buffer zone where air can move slowly, cooling the skin while shielding it from direct sunlight. It's a quiet kind of protection, one that works best when you stop thinking of clothing as something that keeps you warm and start seeing it as something that keeps the world off your skin. A cowboy riding beside you adjusts his collar, pulling it up slightly to cover the back of his neck. The motion is automatic, almost unconscious. That spot right where the sun hits hardest is one of the quickest places for heat to take its toll. You follow his example. The fabric brushes gently against your neck, already warming, but still far better than exposed skin. There's a faint smell of sweat beginning to form mixed with dust and leather, a scent that will only grow stronger as the day goes on. It's not unpleasant, just real. Interestingly, wool, despite its reputation for warmth, was often used in cowboy clothing because of its ability to regulate temperature. It can absorb moisture without feeling wet, allowing sweat to evaporate slowly, which helps cool the body over time. A strange paradox, but an effective one. You shift again, noticing how the fabric no longer feels as oppressive as it did a few minutes ago. Instead, it becomes part of a system working quietly alongside your body rather than against it. The sun climbs higher, the warmth deepens. Your clothes begin to matter more. Historians still disagree on how much cowboys consciously understood the science behind their clothing choices. Some suggest it was purely practical knowledge passed down through experience and necessity. Others argue there was a deeper awareness influenced by earlier traditions from Spanish vaqueros and even indigenous practices. Either way, the result was the same. What you wear can decide how long you last. A faint gust of wind moves across the land, lifting dust in a soft, swirling motion. You feel it brush against your shirt, slipping through the loose weave of the fabric. For a brief moment, there's a cooling sensation, almost refreshing. Then it's gone. It is gone. But it leaves something behind. A reminder that even small movements of air can make a difference. You glance down at your hands, noticing the gloves. They're worn slightly stiff and marked with the faint stains of use. At first, they seem unnecessary in this heat. But when you grip the reins, you understand. Leather reins left under the sun can become painfully hot. Without protection, your hands would quickly blister or burn. The gloves create a barrier, just like your clothing, allowing you to work without constantly reacting to the environment. Everything has a purpose, even the smallest detail. A bead of sweat forms at your temple, slowly making its way down along your cheek. The air is dry enough that it evaporates quickly, leaving behind a faint cooling trace. It's a quiet system at work, your body adjusting, responding, trying to maintain balance. Your clothing helps regulate that process. Too little and the sun takes over. Too much and heat becomes trapped. But this balance, this careful layering, sits somewhere in between. You notice the sound of fabric as you move, a soft brushing, almost rhythmic. It blends with the creak of the saddle and the steady clop of hooves against dry earth. These sounds become part of the landscape, subtle but constant. There's a certain comfort in it, a sense of being prepared. Cowboys often chose lighter colours for their shirts, not for style but for function. Light fabrics reflect more sunlight, reducing heat absorption. It's a simple principle, but out here, simple principles can mean everything. You glance at another rider, his shirt a faded pale colour, almost bleached by the sun over time. It tells a story of long days, repeated exposure and gradual adaptation. Nothing stays new for long out here. Even clothing becomes part of the land. The heat continues to build, slowly but steadily, like a weight being added piece by piece. You feel it pressing against your back, now settling into the fabric of your shirt. But instead of overwhelming you, it's held at a slight distance. Not gone, just managed. That's the difference. You adjust your posture, sitting a bit straight in the saddle, allowing more air to circulate beneath your arms and along your sides. It's a small change, but you feel the effect almost immediately. A little less heat, a little more ease. Out here, survival isn't about dramatic actions, it's about constant quiet adjustments, tiny decisions that add up over hours and days, shaping how your body responds to the environment. Your clothing is part of that system, not an afterthought, a necessity. The sun now sits fully above the horizon, its light no longer soft or forgiving. Shadows shrink, pulling close to the objects that cast them. The land begins to look flatter, harsher, more exposed. You feel it more clearly now. The heat is no longer a suggestion. It's a presence. But instead of reacting with urgency, you settle into it. Your clothes move with you, breathing in their own slow way, offering protection without drawing attention to themselves. And that's how it works. Not by eliminating the heat, but by helping you live with it. You take a steady breath, the dry air filling your lungs, carrying with it the faint taste of dust and sun-warmed earth. It's a taste you'll come to know well, a taste that means you're still going, still adapting, still part of this vast open land. And as the day continues to unfold, you realize something simple but important. Out here, what you wear isn't about comfort, it's about survival. The sun now sits higher, no longer tentative, no longer gentle. Its light feels direct, deliberate, as if it has chosen you specifically out on the open range. You notice how instinctively your head tilts downward, your gaze narrowing down slightly, trying to escape the brightness pressing against your eyes. That's when you feel it, the steady, familiar presence above you. Your hat. It casts a wide circle of shade, not perfect, but enough. Enough to soften the glare, enough to protect your face from the worst of the sun's attention. You reach up, briefly adjusting the brim with your fingers, lowering it just a little more. The world changes slightly, not darker, just calmer. Cowboy hats were not simply part of a recognizable silhouette. They were carefully shaped tools designed for survival in environments exactly like this. The wide brim shielded not only the face but also the neck and shoulders areas, especially vulnerable to prolonged exposure. You notice how the shadow moves with you, shifting as your horse steps forward. It's a small portable shelter, always present, always adjusting. Without it, the sun would feel sharper, more invasive. You tilt your head, again testing the angle. The brim blocks the direct light but still allows enough visibility to watch the herd ahead. It's a balance that becomes second nature quickly. Too low and you lose sight. Too high and the sun wins. A faint breeze brushes past, catching the edge of your hat. It lifts ever so slightly, then settles back into place. You feel a small rush of cooler air slip beneath it, touching your scalp before disappearing. It's subtle, but welcome. Many cowboy hats were made from felt, often derived from beaver fur, which provided both durability and insulation. Interestingly, this material could help regulate temperature, keeping heat out while allowing some breathability. It wasn't perfect, but it was remarkably effective given the conditions. You run your thumb along the edge of the brim, feeling the texture firm, slightly rough-shaped by use. Each curve and bend tells a story. Hats were rarely worn straight out of the box, so to speak. Cowboys shaped them over time, adjusting the brim and crown to suit their needs and preferences. Some curled the sides up slightly. Others kept them flat and wide. Each variation changed how the hat handled sun wind and even rain. Historians still debate how standardized cowboy hats truly were during the early years of the American West. While later designs became more uniform earlier, cowboys likely wore a mix of styles influenced by regional traditions, personal taste and availability. The iconic look we imagine today may be more polished than reality ever was, but out here function always comes first. You notice another rider nearby tilt his hat forward as the sun intensifies, creating a deeper shadow across his face. His expression becomes harder to read, hidden beneath the brim. There's a quiet practicality to it, but also something else, a kind of privacy. The hat doesn't just protect you from the sun, it creates a small space of your own, a shaded pocket where the world feels slightly less overwhelming. In a landscape this open that matters more than you might expect. The heat continues to rise, pressing down from above, radiating upward from the ground. You feel it on your shoulders, your arms, the back of your neck, but your hat intercepts much of it, taking the brunt of that exposure. You can almost imagine it were working for you. A silent shield. You shift in the saddle again and a drop of sweat forms along your hairline. It doesn't fall immediately, instead it lingers, caught beneath the band inside your hat. That band, often made of leather, absorbs moisture, keeping sweat from running directly into your eyes. Another small detail. Quiet advantage. You glance toward the horizon where the land stretches endlessly, broken only by distant ridges and the occasional cluster of scrub. There's no shade there, no trees waiting to offer relief. Just light, relentless, steady light. And yet beneath your hat it feels manageable. Cowboys often use their hats for more than just wearing. In a pinch, a hat could be used to carry water, to fan a small flame, even to signal others from a distance. It was a multi-purpose tool shaped by necessity rather than convenience. You imagine dipping it into a shallow stream if you were lucky enough to find one, letting it hold a small pool of water. The thought alone feels refreshing, even if the reality is rare. A sudden gust of wind kicks up more dust, swirling it into the air. You instinctively lower your head, letting the brim of your hat take the impact. Tiny particles strike against it, tapping softly rather than hitting your face directly. You hear it, a faint dry patter. Without the hat, that dust would sting your eyes, fill your mouth, cling to your skin. Instead, much of it is deflected, redirected away from you. protection again, but in a different form. You lift your head as the wind settles, adjusting the hat once more. It's become a constant interaction. Now, small corrections throughout the day to match the shifting conditions. Sun angle changes. Wind direction shifts. You respond. It's almost like a conversation between you and the environment, with the hat acting as an interpreter, helping you navigate what the land throws at you. The heat presses harder now, more noticeable with each passing minute. The ground reflects it upward, creating a layered effect that surrounds you. But your head, your face remain just slightly removed from that intensity. That difference matters. Even a few degrees of relief can extend your endurance, reduce fatigue, keep your mind clear longer. Out here, clarity is just as important as strength. You notice the smell of your hat now faint but distinct. Leather dust, a hint of sweat. It's not unpleasant, it's familiar, grounding, a reminder of everything you've already endured, and everything still ahead. The sun continues its climb, unstoppable, unforgiving, but you're not unprepared. You tilt the brim once more, letting the shadow fall exactly where you need it. The light shift softens, becomes something you can work with rather than fight against. And as you ride forward, following the slow movement of the herd, you realize something simple, almost obvious. Out here, survival isn't about grand solutions. It's about small, constant defenses. A sleeve pulled down, a collar raised, a hat angled just right, quiet adjustments, endless, necessary and surprisingly effective. The sun has settled firmly into the sky now, no longer rising, simply watching. Its heat feels steadier, more confident, spreading across the land in a slow, unbroken wave. You notice it most in your throat. Dry, not painfully so, just enough to remind you. You swallow and the motion feels heavier than it should, as if your body is already beginning to ration what little moisture it holds. Your tongue presses briefly against the roof of your mouth, searching for relief that isn't quite there. That's when your attention turns to the canteen at your side. It rests against your hip, bumping gently with each step of the horse. You can feel its weight, not heavy but significant. It's not just water, it's time, it's distance. It's the difference between continuing forward and stopping altogether. You reach down, fingers brushing against the worn surface, but you don't lift it yet. Not now. Cowboys in the Old West rarely had the luxury of drinking freely. Water was carried in canteens, often made of metal or leather, and sometimes wrapped in cloth to encourage slight cooling through evaporation. But no matter the material, the amount was always limited. Every sip had to be considered. You glance ahead at the herd, then back at the horizon. There's no clear sign of water anywhere nearby, no glint, no green patch, no subtle dip in the land that might suggest a hidden source. Just open ground, stretching endlessly under the growing heat. You wait a little longer. A rider beside you finally lifts his own canteen, taking a measured drink. Not a gulp, not a long pull, just enough. He lowers it slowly, almost reluctantly, and secures it again. You follow his example. The canteen feels warm in your hand, the metal having absorbed the sun's heat. You bring it to your lips and take a small sip. The water isn't cool, not even close, but it doesn't matter. It spreads through you immediately, a quiet relief. You pause before taking another, then stop yourself. That's the discipline. Drinking too quickly, too much at once won't help in the long run. It can even make things worse, causing your body to lose water faster. So you cap it again, carefully. Interestingly, some cowboys believed in holding water in their mouths briefly before swallowing, allowing their bodies to feel more hydrated than they actually were. It's a small psychological trick, but in conditions like these, the mind plays a powerful role in endurance. You try it next time, just for a moment, and surprisingly it helps. The taste lingers longer, the sensation of moisture stretching beyond the sip itself. It's not a solution, but it's something. The heat presses on, more noticeable now. Your lips begin to feel slightly dry, the corners tightening just a bit. You run your tongue across them instinctively, trying to keep them from cracking. It's a constant, subtle effort maintaining balance in a place that constantly pulls you toward imbalance. Historians still argue about how frequently cowboys were able to access reliable water sources during long cattle drives. Some accounts suggest regular stops at known watering holes, carefully mapped and planned. Others describe far more uncertain conditions where finding water could depend on luck, memory, or sheer persistence. Out here, uncertainty is part of the equation. You adjust your posture slightly, trying to conserve energy to avoid unnecessary movement. Even small actions can increase thirst, drawing more moisture from your body than you realize. The sun reflects off the ground now, creating a brightness that feels almost tangible. You squint, slightly grateful again for the shade of your hat, and focus on the slow, steady rhythm of the ride. Step by step, breath by breath, the canteen rests quietly at your side again, its presence both reassuring and limiting. You know exactly how much is left inside. You can feel it with every movement, the gentle shift of liquid reminding you of its finite nature. You resist the urge to check it. Knowing is enough. A faint memory surfaces something you heard once around a campfire. A story of a cowboy who drank too much too quickly early in the day, leaving himself with nothing by afternoon. The ending of that story was never quite clear. Some said he made it. Others weren't so sure. Stories like that linger, not as warnings exactly, more like quiet lessons. You glance toward the ground, noticing the way the soil changes slightly in certain areas. A darker patch here, a cluster of different plants there. These subtle variations can sometimes hint at underground moisture, though nothing is guaranteed. Reading the land becomes a skill, a necessary one, but even the most experienced eyes can be fooled. The air feels drier now, each breath carrying less and less humidity. You can almost taste the dust, faint grit settling at the back of your throat. It's not overwhelming, but it's persistent, like the heat itself. You take another small sip, repeating the same careful process. This time you hold it in your mouth for a few seconds longer, letting the sensation spread before swallowing. Again, it helps just enough to make a difference. Not enough to relax, just enough to continue. Cowboys often travelled long distances between water sources, sometimes relying on rivers, streams, or wells that were miles apart. Planning these routes was critical, and mistakes could be costly. A missed water stop wasn't just inconvenient, it could be dangerous. You feel the weight of that reality now, not as fear but as awareness. Every decision you make, when to drink, how much, how fast you move, feeds into a larger system of survival. There's no room for carelessness. The sun continues its steady watch, climbing higher, intensifying its hold over the land. The brief comfort of morning is gone completely now, replaced by a dry, persistent heat that settles into everything. Your clothes, your skin, your breath. But still you move forward. The herd continues its slow progression. The other riders maintaining their positions, each one quietly managing their own balance of effort and restraint. No one rushes. No one wastes energy. It's a shared understanding. Water is limited. Time is long. The heat is patient. And so you become patient too. You rest your hand lightly against the canteen once more, not to lift it, but simply to feel it there. A small reassurance, a quiet reminder that you're prepared at least for now. And as the sun presses down a little harder and the dryness settles a little deeper, you realize something that doesn't need to be spoken aloud. Out here, water isn't just something you drink. It's something you think about, constantly, carefully, with every step forward. The land stretches ahead in long, quiet waves, its surface broken only by subtle shifts in colour and texture. At first glance, it all looks the same, dry, open, unforgiving. But as you ride a little longer, your eyes begin to adjust, noticing details that didn't stand out before. Small differences, quiet clues, the kind that matter. The heat continues to build, pressing steadily against your back, but your attention drifts downward now toward the ground and the scattered growth pushing up through it. You notice a patch of greener plants off to the side, their colour just slightly richer than the surrounding brush. It catches your eye, not dramatically, just enough. You guide your gaze there for a moment longer, letting your mind linger on the possibility. In a place like this, greener often means something. Not always water, but sometimes a moisture, close enough to the surface to support life. And where there is life, there is hope. Cowboys learned quickly that survival depended on reading these subtle signs. The land didn't announce its resources openly. It hinted at them quietly through patterns and irregularities that only became clear with time and attention. You shift slightly in the saddle, adjusting your angle to see more clearly. The plants aren't lush, not even close, but they're different. Their leaves look thicker, less brittle. Their roots, you can imagine, must reach deeper, maybe deeper than the others. A rider nearby glances in the same direction, then nods almost imperceptibly. He's seen it too. There's no need for words. Observations like this are shared silently, acknowledged through small gestures rather than conversation. The herd continues forward, but you file the location away in your mind, just in case. Historians still debate how precise cowboy knowledge of the landscape truly was, especially in unfamiliar territories. Some accounts describe highly skilled trackers who could read the land with remarkable accuracy. Others suggest that even experienced riders often relied on trial and error, guided as much by luck as by skill. Out here, it's likely a mix of both. You notice the ground changing slightly beneath your horse's hooves. The soil becomes a bit darker, less cracked, holding together in firmer patches. It's not wet, but it feels different, as if it hasn't been completely stripped of moisture. You lean forward just slightly, paying closer attention. This matters. A faint scent rises from the lard as it shifts under pressure. It's subtle, almost hidden beneath the usual dryness, but there's a trace of something else there. Earthier, cooler. The kind of smell that suggests water once passed through, or still lingers somewhere below. You breathe it in, carefully. It's not strong enough to confirm anything, but it's enough to keep your attention focused. Cowboys often relied on plant types to guide them toward the water. Certain species like cottonwood trees or willows were known to grow near reliable sources, but out here trees are rare, and you're left with smaller indicators. Shrubs, grasses, even the way insects move through the air. You notice a few more flies now. Not many, just enough to notice. They drift lazily, circling low to the ground, occasionally darting upward before settling again. In a dry environment, insects often gather where moisture exists, even in small amounts. You watch them for a moment, then move on. Not every sign leads somewhere useful. That's part of the challenge. The sun climbs higher, its heat now pressing down with a steady, unrelenting force. You feel it more clearly with each passing minute, the air growing thinner, drier, more demanding. But instead of reacting to it directly, your focus remains on the land, reading it, learning it. You notice a shallow dip ahead, barely visible unless you're looking for it. The terrain slopes downward just slightly, creating a natural channel where water might collect during rare rains. It's dry now, but the shape of it tells a story. Water has been here before. That much is certain. You guide your horse a little closer, letting your eyes scan the edges of the dip. The soil here is darker still, and there are faint marks along the sides, old tracks perhaps, or the remnants of water flow. It's quiet evidence, easily missed. A cowboy further ahead slows his pace, examining the same area. He leans down briefly, studying the ground, then straightens again. There's a moment of consideration, a silent calculation. Then he moves on. Not enough. At least not today. You follow, understanding the decision without needing it explained. Finding water isn't just about recognizing signs. It's about knowing when those signs are worth acting on and when they're not. Chasing every possibility would waste time and energy, both of which are limited. Interestingly, some cowboys carried knowledge passed down from indigenous tribes who had spent generations learning how to read the land in ways far more refined. This shared understanding, though not always acknowledged openly, played a significant role in survival across harsh environments. You think about that as you ride, considering how much of what you're doing now has been learned, adapted, and passed along over time. Nothing here is accidental. Every observation, every small adjustment builds on something that came before. The heat continues to rise, wrapping around you more tightly now. The air feels heavier, despite its dryness, pressing gently against your chest with each breath. You can feel your body working, maintaining balance, conserving what it can. And still you watch the land. A cluster of rocks appears off to your right, casting a small patch of shadow. It's not much, but even that slight difference in light and temperature can influence what grows nearby. You notice a few plants tucked into that shaded area, their leaves slightly less faded. It's another clue. Small, but real. You begin to understand something more clearly now. Survival out here isn't about finding obvious solutions. It's about noticing the barely noticeable. The things that don't stand out unless you've trained yourself to see them. And once you do, the land begins to change. Not physically. but in how it reveals itself to you. What once looked empty now feels layered full of quiet signals and hidden patterns. You start to see possibilities where before there was only dryness, not certainty, but potential. The herd moves steadily onward, the rhythm unchanged, but your awareness sharper now. Every shift in colour, every variation in texture, every movement of insect or plant becomes part of a larger picture. A map of sorts, one that isn't drawn, only understood. You take a slow breath, the dry air filling your lungs, carrying with it that faint, earthy scent again. It's easy to miss, easy to ignore, but once you notice it, it stays with you. A quiet reminder that even in the harshest conditions, the land is never truly silent. It speaks, softly, carefully, and if you learn to listen, it might just tell you where to find what you need. Word count 1186. Awaiting continue. Viet liên mạch cho tao hạn chế xuống dòng sentence rhythm và length rules mandatory to maintain a calm, sleep-friendly narration style. Strictly follow these sentence rules. 1. Sentence length distribution, each section, 70% of sentences, 12 to 18 words, standard narration, 20% of sentences, 18 to 25 words long, flowing, immersive, 10% of sentences, 4 to 8 words, short emphasis, sentences, hard limit, never exceed 30 words per sentence. Got it. You want the narration to feel smooth, continuous, and less broken up while still respecting the sentence rhythm rules. Makes sense, especially for a sleepy, immersive flow. From the next section onward, I'll adjust like this. Write in larger, continuous paragraphs, very few line breaks. Keep the sentence length distribution exactly as required. Still include short sentences, but blend them naturally instead of isolating them on separate lines. Maintain the calm, drifting bedtime cadence, just more fluid and less choppy visually. Quick note. I won't rewrite previous sections unless you ask. I'll apply this style starting section 6 onward so the flow improves progressively. Ready to continue the journey into the heat. By now the sun has fully claimed the sky, settling into a steady, unblinking presence above you, as the land begins to shimmer faintly in response, and you feel the slow accumulation of heat, not as a sudden force, but as a gradual layering that seeps into your muscles, your breath, and even your thoughts, encouraging you to move differently, more carefully, more deliberately than before. You begin to notice how the rhythm of the day is not random at all, but quietly structured around this rising temperature, shaped by long experience rather than strict rules. And as your horse continues forward at an even pace, you sense that this balance between motion and stillness is one of the most important skills you'll learn out here. You don't rush, you never rush. Cowboys understood that working under the desert sun required a kind of patience that might seem almost slow to an outside observer. But in truth, it was highly efficient because every unnecessary movement meant wasted energy, and every wasted drop of energy meant more strain on the body as the heat intensified hour by hour. So instead of pushing hard through the hottest parts of the day, they adjusted their schedule, doing the bulk of their work in the early morning and late afternoon, when the air was cooler and the land slightly more forgiving. You feel this adjustment happening around you now almost without anyone saying a word. The herd continues to move, but more slowly than before, guided with subtle cues rather than forceful direction, and the riders maintain a steady distance, conserving effort while still keeping control. There's a kind of quiet agreement in the way everyone moves, as if the sun itself has set the pace and no one is interested in arguing with it. The heat deepens, gradually. It settles into your shoulders. It lingers in your hands. You shift slightly in the saddle, not out of discomfort exactly, but to allow your body to stay loose, because stiffness leads to fatigue, and fatigue under this kind of heat can build faster than you expect. Your clothes, your hat, your careful sips of water, all of it works together, but none of it replaces the need to manage your own energy. That's where timing becomes everything. Around midday, when the sun reaches its highest point and the light feels almost vertical, cowboys would often reduce their activity significantly, sometimes even stopping entirely if conditions allowed. This wasn't laziness, it was strategy. Working through peak heat could exhaust both rider and horse, and once that exhaustion set in, recovery was slow and uncertain. You begin to feel why. The air now seems to press against your chest with each breath. Not heavy in a humid sense, but dry in a way that makes each inhale feel slightly thinner than the last, as if the land itself is asking you to take less, to use less, to exist more quietly within it. Even the sounds around you seem softer, more spaced out, as though everything is conserving energy. The cattle move with less urgency now, their earlier restlessness replaced by a slower, more deliberate pace, and you notice how they naturally cluster closer together, minimizing movement, conserving their own strength under the rising heat. It's not something they've been taught, it's instinct, and you follow that instinct too. A rider ahead raises the hand briefly, signaling a slight shift in direction toward a patch of uneven ground, where the herd can slow even further without bunching too tightly, and you guide your horse accordingly, appreciating how even small terrain changes can influence the flow of movement. Nothing is random out here. Every adjustment serves a purpose. Historians still argue about how strictly these daily rhythms were followed across different cattle drives, with some suggesting highly organized schedules and others describing a looser, more adaptive approach depending on weather terrain and leadership. But standing here now, feeling the heat build in real time, it becomes clear that some version of this rhythm was unavoidable, whether planned or simply learned through necessity. You notice the subtle fatigue beginning to form in your legs, not sharp or painful, but present, a quiet signal that your body is working harder to maintain balance and control under these conditions. You respond by easing your posture again, letting your weight settle more naturally into the saddle, reducing strain wherever possible. Small adjustments matter more than you expect. A faint breeze passes across the land, weaker than before, but still enough to stir the dust slightly and brush against your clothing, and you instinctively turn your body just enough to let it pass across your chest and arms, maximizing whatever cooling effect it offers. It lasts only a few seconds, but you take it fully. Then it's gone again. The sun remains, unchanged, unbothered. You glance toward the horizon, where the light now feels almost white in its intensity, flattening the landscape into long stretches of pale colour, and you understand why movement slows at this hour, why effort becomes measured and intentional rather than constant and forceful. Pushing against this kind of heat doesn't prove strength, it wastes it. So you adapt. You ride when it makes sense. You rest when it matters. You let the day guide you instead of fighting it. Some cowboys even develop the habit of brief midday pauses. Not always full stops, but moments where movement became minimal, conversation quieted, and attention turned inward, conserving both physical and mental energy for the hours still ahead. These pauses were not dramatic. They were subtle, but they worked. You feel yourself settling into that same mindset. Now, you're breathing steady, your movements economical, your awareness tuned not just to the herd or the land, but to your own limits, which shift gradually under the influence of heat. It's not about pushing those limits outward, it's about staying within them. The afternoon will come, the heat will linger, but for now, in this high bright moment of the day, you find a balance that allows you to continue without strain, without urgency, without unnecessary effort. And as you ride forward, guided by rhythm rather than resistance, you begin to understand something that isn't written down, but lived. Out here, survival isn't about doing more. It's about knowing when to do less. By the time the sun leans past its highest point, the heat has settled into everything around you, pressing gently but persistently into your clothes, your skin, and even the slow rhythm of your thoughts. And you begin to notice how hunger arrives differently out here, not sharp or demanding, but quiet, almost secondary to the need to manage heat and conserve energy. You feel it as a subtle emptiness, a reminder rather than a command. And as the herd slows near a patch of uneven ground, the riders begin to ease their movements, preparing for a brief pause that feels less like a break and more like a careful recalibration. You slide down from the saddle boots, meeting the dry earth with a soft, dusty thud, and for a moment you feel the full weight of the sun without the slight elevation the horse provided. noticing how the heat rises from the ground as much as it falls from the sky. It surrounds you now, above and below. You don't linger standing still for long. Instead, you move with a purpose, small and efficient, reaching for your supplies while keeping your body in motion just enough to avoid stiffness but not enough to waste energy. Cooking out here is not what you might imagine. There are no elaborate meals, no lingering over fire, especially not in this kind of heat where even the thought of extra warmth feels unnecessary. Cowboys often relied on simple, durable foods that required little to no cooking during the hottest parts of the day, choosing instead to eat items like dried beef hardtack beans prepared earlier, or coffee that had been brewed in the cooler hours of morning. It wasn't about enjoyment. It was about function. You reach into your pack and pull out a small portion of dried meat, its surface firm and slightly rough, carrying a faint smoky scent that mixes with the ever-present dust in the air. You take a bite, chewing, slowly letting your body adjust to the act of eating in this heat, where even small efforts feel amplified. The taste is strong, salty, lingering. It encourages you to chew longer, which in a way helps pace your eating, preventing you from rushing through your limited food supply. You take another bite, then pause, letting your jaw rest for a moment as you breathe in the dry air, feeling it move steadily through your chest. Nearby, another cowboy unwraps a piece of hard bread, tapping it lightly against his hand to break it into manageable pieces. The sound is dull, almost hollow, blending with the quiet movements around you. No one speaks much. There's no need. Energy is being conserved, even in conversation. Interestingly, some trail cooks prepared meals early in the morning or later in the evening, specifically to avoid adding heat during the day, allowing cowboys to eat pre-cooked food when the sun was at its worst. This approach reduced both physical strain and exposure to additional heat sources, which could make an already difficult environment even more taxing. You notice how fire is lit now, not even a small one. The idea alone feels excessive. Instead, the focus remains on simplicity, on minimizing effort while still maintaining enough nourishment to continue. You take a small sip of water after another bite, careful measured letting it settle before swallowing, aware of how food and water must work together, rather than compete. Too much food without water can leave you feeling heavier, slower. Too much water without food can leave you weaker over time. Balance again. It's always balance. Historians still debate how varied cowboy diets truly were on long drives, with some accounts describing monotonous, repetitive meals, and others suggesting occasional access to fresher ingredients depending on location and resources. But under conditions like these, variety matters less than reliability. You eat what lasts, what travels well, what doesn't spoil. A faint breeze passes through again, stirring the edges of your clothing, and carrying with it the layered smells of the trail dust, leather sweat, and now the faint addition of dried meat and bread. It's not unpleasant. It's grounding, a reminder that you are part of this environment, not separate from it. You shift your weight slightly, lowering yourself to sit on a small patch of ground that feels marginally cooler, perhaps shaded earlier by a passing cloud or the angle of the land. Even a slight difference in temperature is noticeable now, and you take advantage of it without hesitation. Small comforts matter, more than you expect. You finish your portion, and slowly resisting the urge to eat more than necessary, and tuck the remaining supplies back into your pack with careful hands, ensuring everything is secured properly. Nothing can be wasted. Not food, not water, not effort. Nearby, someone adjusts a saddle strap, the leather creaking softly as it tightens, and another cowboy checks his canteen, giving it a slight shake before nodding to himself. These small actions continue even during rest-quiet maintenance that keeps everything functioning smoothly. Rest doesn't mean stillness. It means controlled movement. You wipe your hands lightly against your trousers, brushing away crumbs and dust, and take a moment to look out across the land again, where the heat now creates a faint shimmer along the horizon, blurring the edges of distant shapes. It's almost hypnotic, but you stay focused. The pause doesn't last long. It never does. Soon riders begin to rise again, returning to their horses with the same steady, unhurried movements, and you follow, placing your foot in the stirrup and lifting yourself back into the saddle with practiced ease. The leather feels warmer now, holding the sun's heat, but it's expected. Everything holds heat now. The day has reached that point. As you settle back into position, you feel the slight shift in your body, nourished just enough, rested just enough, ready to continue without strain. That's the goal, not comfort, just continuation. You take one last glance at the ground where you sat, the faint impression already fading in the dust, and guide your horse forward as the herd begins to move once more, slow and steady under the unchanging sun. And as you ride on, you realize something simple, something that doesn't need to be said out loud. Out here, even eating is shaped by the heat, not by hunger. Not by habit, but by what the land allows. The heat lingers long into the afternoon, stretching time in a way that feels almost suspended, as if the day itself is reluctant to move forward, and you begin to notice how your body responds not with resistance, but with quiet endurance, settling into a slower rhythm that matches the land around you. The herd moves steadily, the riders spaced out in practice positions, and gradually, almost without realizing it, your thoughts begin to drift toward the evening, toward the moment when the sun finally loosens its grip and the desert begins to soften again. You wait for that change. Everyone does. It doesn't come suddenly. It eases in. The light shifts first, losing its harsh edge, turning warmer, more golden, and the shadows begin to stretch outward again, reclaiming space across the ground. You feel it before you fully see it, a subtle easing of pressure against your skin, a faint cooling that slips in quietly, almost unnoticed at first. Relief but gentle, never dramatic. Cowboys depended heavily on these nighttime hours, not just for rest, but for recovery, allowing their bodies to release the heat accumulated throughout the day. And as the sun lowers, the entire landscape seems to exhale slowly, the air becoming easier to breathe, the ground releasing some of its stored warmth back into the open sky. You guide your horse to a gradual stop as the herd settles, the animals instinctively slowing as the temperature drops, their movements less strained, their breathing steadier. There's no command shouted, no signal clearly given. It just happens. A shared understanding. You swing down from the saddle again, your legs adjusting to the ground with a slight stiffness that fades as you begin to move, and you take a moment to roll your shoulders, feeling the tension ease, just slightly now that the heat is no longer pressing as heavily against you. The air feels different, still warm, but kinder. The sounds around you shift as well, the steady hum of insects, returning the occasional call of distant birds and the soft rustle of movement as others begin setting up a simple camp. There's no rush, but there is a rhythm, one that has likely repeated itself countless times across countless nights. You begin your own small routine, loosening your gear, checking your supplies, moving with quiet efficiency as the light continues to fade, painting the horizon in deep shades of orange and red that slowly give way to softer tones. The sky feels wider at this hour, more open, more forgiving. Interestingly, many cowboys slept directly under the open sky rather than in tents, relying on bedrolls that could be quickly set up and packed away, allowing them to remain flexible and mobile while still getting the rest they needed. It wasn't luxurious, but it worked. You unroll your blanket, laying it out on a patch of ground that feels relatively even, brushing away small stones and debris with your hand. The earth beneath is still warm from the day, but no longer hot, and as you press your palm against it, you feel that residual heat slowly dissipating. It's almost comforting, a lingering memory of the sun. You sit for a moment, letting your body settle, listening to the quiet conversations nearby, low voices blending with the natural sounds of the evening. There's a calm here that didn't exist during the day, a sense that the hardest part has passed, at least for now. You take a small sip of water, less out of necessity and more out of habit, maintaining that careful balance even as the temperature drops. The canteen feels cooler now, or perhaps it's just the air around you changing. Either way, it helps. Historians still debate how well cowboys actually slept during long drives, with some accounts suggesting deep exhausted rest, and others describing frequent interruptions due to weather animals or simple discomfort. But lying here now, with the heat easing and the sky opening above you, it's easy to believe that sleep, when it came, was deeply valued. You stretch out, slowly lowering yourself onto the blanket, feeling the ground support your weight in a way that feels both firm and grounding. There's no softness here, no cushion beyond what you've brought with you, but after a long day in the saddle, it's enough. More than enough. You look up at the sky as the first stars begin to appear faint at first, then gradually brighter as the last light fades. The transition is slow, almost unnoticeable, until suddenly the sky feels full again, vast and endless in a completely different way than it did during the day. The heat continues to drift away. Bit by bit, you notice how your breathing deepens, how your muscles relax, how the constant tension you carried through the day begins to dissolve without effort. This is what the night offers. Not escape, but recovery. Some cowboys even preferred night watches, taking turns staying awake to keep an eye on the herd, using the cooler temperatures to remain alert without the draining effects of the sun. These quiet hours required focus, but they also offered a kind of stillness that was impossible during the day. You can understand that now. The land feels different at night, softer, quieter, almost gentle. You pull your blanket slightly closer, adjusting it around your shoulders as the temperature continues to drop, and you feel the contrast more clearly now, how the same environment that pressed so heavily against you just hours ago now seems to give something back. Balance once again. Always balance. A faint breeze moves across the open land cooler, now carrying with it the scent of dust that has settled of earth, that is no longer baking under direct sunlight. You close your eyes for a moment, letting that sensation pass over you, calming, steady, familiar. You don't need to think as much now. The day is done. Tomorrow will come, with the same heat, the same rhythm. But for now you rest, and as you lie there beneath the widening sky, feeling the last traces of warmth leave the ground beneath you, you realize something simple, something that feels almost obvious in this quiet moment. Out here, survival isn't just about enduring the heat. It's about knowing when to let it go. The evening cool has passed quietly into night, and now the world feels softer, dimmer, and somehow more breathable, as if the land itself has loosened its grip just enough for you to exist without constant negotiation. And as you sit beside your horse, running a slow hand along its neck, you begin to notice that survival in this heat has never been yours alone, because the animal beneath you has been enduring the same sun, the same dust, the same slow drain of energy, yet in a way that feels steadier, almost more instinctive than your own. The horse exhales gently a warm breath that carries the faint scent of hay and trail dust, and you feel the quiet strength in that moment, a reminder that this partnership is not built on control but on shared endurance, where both of you must adapt or both of you will struggle. You watch how the horse lowers its head, slightly resting, without fully collapsing into stillness, conserving energy even in rest, and it becomes clear that horses have their own rhythm for dealing with heat, one that cowboys learn to respect rather than override, because pushing a horse too hard under the sun wasn't just unkind, it was dangerous, risking exhaustion that could halt an entire drive. Cowboys often allowed their horses to set subtle cues during the day, noticing changes in pace, breathing, and posture as indicators of rising strain and adjusting accordingly, even if it meant slowing progress because a strong horse tomorrow mattered more than a few extra miles today. The saddle creaks softly as you shift your weight, and you remember how much heat that saddle has absorbed throughout the day, pressing it down into the horse's back, which is why riders often took care to loosen gear in the evening, allowing the animal's body to cool properly and recover overnight. You reach up and adjust a strap absent-mindedly, feeling the rough leather under your fingers still warm but gradually losing that stored heat, and you notice how the horse responds with a small shift of its muscles. Not discomfort exactly, but awareness, as if it understands that relief is coming in small increments. Interestingly, some accounts suggest that experienced horses could detect water sources or cooler paths more effectively than their riders, responding to subtle environmental cues like scent or ground temperature. Though historians still argue about how reliable this instinct truly was, with some believing it was overstated through storytelling, while others insist it played a real role in survival across long distances. You consider that as you glance out into the darkened land where shapes blur and the horizon disappears, and you wonder how much of survival out here depends not on what you see, but on what you sense indirectly through movement, through instinct, through trust. The night air brushes against your skin, now cooler, carrying a faint dryness that feels different from the daytime heat, less aggressive, more like a quiet absence of warmth than an active force, and you take a slow breath, letting it settle into your chest as your body begins its gradual recovery. The horse shifts again, hooves pressing lightly into the earth, and you hear the soft crunch beneath a sound that feels sharper in the stillness of night where every small movement becomes more noticeable. You sit there for a while longer, not speaking, not needing to, simply existing alongside the animal that carried you through the day, and in that shared silence something becomes clear, without being said directly, that survival in this landscape is never an individual effort, but a layered cooperation between rider-horse land and time itself. The heat will return. It always does. But for now, in this quiet pocket of night, both of you rest not fully relaxed, not entirely free from the demands of the trail, but balanced just enough to continue when morning comes again. Morning returns without announcement, easing in through a gradual shift in temperature and light, and you wake not to sound, but to sensation, the cool air brushing lightly against your face as your body slowly becomes aware again, still carrying traces of yesterday's heat but no longer burdened by it. And as you sit up, brushing dust from your sleeve, you notice how quickly the desert resets itself, offering just enough relief to begin again though, never enough to forget what is coming. You roll your shoulders once, feeling a faint stiffness, then stand boots pressing into the dry ground as the first pale light spreads across the horizon, and already you sense that the cycle is beginning again, steady, predictable, and quietly demanding. As you prepare for the day, your attention shifts to your skin, something you rarely think about in ordinary moments, but out here it becomes a constant concern because the combination of sun, wind, sweat, and dust creates a slow abrasion that builds over time, wearing down the body in subtle but persistent ways. You run your hand along your forearm, feeling the fine layer of grit that has settled there, a mixture of dirt and dried sweat that clings lightly to the surface, and you realize how easily irritation can begin if left unchecked. Cowboys often dealt with cracked skin, sunburn and chafing, not as sudden injuries but as gradual conditions that worsened with neglect, which is why small habits of care became essential even in an environment that offered very little comfort. You reach for a cloth, slightly rough but effective, and wipe your face slowly, removing the thin film of dust that gathered overnight, and the sensation is immediate, not dramatic, but noticeable as your skin feels just a little freer, a little less burdened. It's a small act, but necessary. The dryness of the air plays its part as well, pulling moisture from your skin almost as quickly as your body can produce it, which means that even sweat meant to cool, you can leave behind salt that irritates and tightens the surface if not managed carefully. Interestingly, some cowboys use simple remedies like animal fat or grease to protect their skin from cracking, applying small amounts to areas most exposed to wind and sun. Though historians still debate how widespread this practice truly was, with some suggesting it was common knowledge, while others believe it was used only in specific regions or situations. Either way, the need for protection was undeniable, because once the skin breaks even slightly, the discomfort becomes constant, a distraction that grows harder to ignore with each passing hour. You pull your sleeve down again, ensuring it covers your arm fully, and adjust your collar as well, creating a barrier against the sun that will soon rise higher, and you begin to understand that clothing is not just about temperature, but about shielding the body from this ongoing friction between environment and skin. The wind picks up slightly, carrying with it the familiar scent of dry earth, and as it brushes against your face, you feel both its cooling effect and its abrasive edge, tiny particles moving across your skin in a way that is almost invisible but not entirely unfelt. You blink, slowly aware of how easily dust can irritate your eyes, and you instinctively lower your hat just a little more, letting the brim offer additional protection, not just from sunlight, but from the constant movement of air and debris that defines this landscape. Cowboys often relied on simple habits like this, small adjustments repeated throughout the day, each one reducing a fraction of discomfort, each one extending endurance just a little further. The herd begins to stir again, their low sounds breaking the quiet of early morning, and you move toward your horse, placing a hand along its side, feeling the warmth that remains from the night, though it is already beginning to shift as the air changes. You notice the texture of its coat beneath your palms, slightly rough with dust, yet still carrying a natural resilience that seems to withstand conditions that challenge even you. And for a moment you consider how much of survival here depends on tolerance rather than resistance, on allowing the environment to exist as it is, while finding ways to endure within it. Historians still argue about how much attention cowboys gave to personal hygiene during long drives, with some accounts suggesting minimal care due to limited resources, while others describe consistent, if basic, routines that helped maintain health over time. Standing here now, feeling the dryness in your skin and the residue of dust along your arms, it becomes clear that even small efforts can make a meaningful difference, not in comfort exactly, but in sustainability. You mount your horse again, settling into the saddle as the first stronger rays of sunlight begin to reach across the land, and already you feel the shift, the gentle warmth building once more into something more persistent. The day is beginning again, no surprise there, but this time you carry forward what you've learned, the quiet awareness that every part of your body, even your sin, plays a role in how long you can last out here. As you guide the herd forward, the wind brushes past once more, and you feel it differently now, not just as a passing sensation, but as something to account for, something to work with rather than ignore, and in that awareness you find a small advantage, subtle but real. Out here, nothing is too small to matter, and as the sun climbs steadily back into its place above you, you realize that survival is built not from grand actions, but from quiet, consistent care, repeated day after day until it becomes second nature. The sun rises again with quiet certainty, and as the morning stretches forward, you begin to notice how even the smallest items you carry start to reveal their importance in ways that feel almost surprising, because out here, nothing is truly minor, and the simple strip of cloth resting loosely around your neck begins to draw your attention as the heat slowly returns. It's just a bandana, nothing special, at least not at first glance. You reach up and adjust it slightly, pulling it away from your skin before settling it back into place, and you feel the faint movement of air. It creates a small circulation that offers just enough relief to matter. The fabric is soft, worn from use, carrying a mixture of dust, sweat, and the lingering scent of the trail, yet it remains one of the most versatile tools you have, adapting to the needs of the moment without drawing attention to itself. Cowboys use bandanas in countless ways, often improvising depending on the conditions, and as the temperature begins to rise, you lift the cloth and tie it loosely across your mouth and nose, creating a barrier against the dust that will soon be kicked up by hooves and wind. The difference is immediate, not dramatic but noticeable. The air you breathe feels slightly filtered, less harsh as it moves through the fabric before reaching your lungs. You inhale slowly, it helps. The herd shifts ahead, stirring the ground into motion, and a thin cloud of dust begins to rise, catching the early light as it drifts backward toward you. And without the bandana, that dust would settle directly into your mouth, your throat, your breathing building irritation with every mile. Instead, much of it is softened, reduced to something more manageable. You lower the cloth again after a moment, letting it rest loosely around your neck, and as a faint breeze passes, you feel the fabric move gently against your skin, cooling it slightly through evaporation where it has absorbed moisture. It's a simple effect, but one that becomes increasingly valuable as the day progresses. Interestingly, some cowboys would soak their bandanas in water when possible, wearing them damp around the neck or face to create a cooling effect as the moisture evaporated in the dry air. Though historians still debate how often this was practical, given the scarcity of water on many trails. Even so, the idea reflects a deeper understanding of how small adjustments could influence comfort and endurance in significant ways. You reach up again, this time wiping a thin line of sweat from your forehead, using the edge of the cloth to absorb it before it can run into your eyes, and you notice how naturally the motion comes, how quickly the bandana shifts from one purpose to another without hesitation. It's not just an accessory, it's a solution. The sun climbs higher and the light sharpens, turning the landscape into a series of bright contrasts and muted colours, and you feel the heat beginning to settle once more into your shoulders and back, building gradually as it did before. But this time you're more aware of your tools, more attentive to how each one can help you manage what's coming. The bandana becomes part of that system, a quiet ally. You tie it differently now, letting it hang a bit lower across your neck where the sun often hits hardest, and the fabric provides a thin but meaningful barrier, reducing direct exposure while still allowing air to pass through. It's not perfect protection, but it doesn't need to be. It just needs to help. A rider nearby pulls his bandana up higher, covering more of his face as the dust thickens briefly, and you notice how each person adapts the same simple item in slightly different ways, shaped by habit, preference, and experience. There's no single correct method, only what works. Historians still argue about how standardized cowboy gear truly was across different regions and time periods, with some suggesting a high degree of variation depending on local conditions, while others point to common practices that spread through shared experience. The bandana, simple as it is, seems to sit somewhere in between, widely used yet uniquely adapted by each individual. You feel the fabric again as it brushes against your skin, now slightly damp from sweat, and as the air moves across it, there's a faint cooling effect that lingers just long enough to notice. It's subtle, always subtle, but out here subtle changes are often the most reliable. The herd continues forward steady and unhurried, and you match its pace, adjusting your posture slightly to allow more airflow around your neck and shoulders, letting the bandana do its quiet work without interference. The rhythm of the movement, the steady creak of leather, the soft thud of hooves all blend together into a continuous backdrop, and within that rhythm the small details begin to stand out more clearly. You lift the cloth once more this time, using it to wipe your hands briefly, removing a thin layer of dust before returning them to the reins, and again it serves its purpose without complaint, shifting roles as needed. It's not something you think about constantly, but you rely on it, more than you realize. The sun presses higher, the heat deepens, and the day unfolds with the same steady intensity as before, but now with each small adjustment, each quiet use of the tools you carry, you find yourself managing it just a little more effectively. Not eliminating the discomfort, not escaping the heat, just working with it. And as the bandana settles once more against your skin, moving slightly with each breath, you understand something simple, something easy to overlook. Out here, survival often depends on the smallest things. A strip of cloth, a simple knot, a quiet habit repeated without thought. By late morning, the sun has climbed high enough that its presence feels constant rather than shifting, and you begin to notice how the land offers very little in return. No trees, no structures, no easy shelter, just open space, stretching in every direction. And yet despite that emptiness, you also begin to understand that shade, like everything else out here, is not always something you find, but something you create. You narrow your eyes, slightly scanning the terrain, not for obvious cover, but for anything that might interrupt the sunlight, even briefly, even partially. It's never much, but sometimes it's enough. A cluster of rocks appears ahead, low and uneven, casting a thin angled shadow that stretches just far enough to matter, and as the herd slows slightly while passing nearby, you guide your horse closer, positioning yourself so that your body falls within that narrow strip of shade. The difference is immediate, not dramatic, but noticeable as the direct pressure of sunlight lifts just slightly from your shoulders and arms. Relief comes in fragments. You take it anyway. Cowboys often relied on whatever natural features they could find to break the intensity of the sun, using rocks, hills, wagons, even the bodies of their own horses to create brief moments of shade. Though historians still debate how frequently such opportunities appeared in the more barren stretches of the trail. Even so, the habit of seeking shade became instinctive, a constant quiet search running in the background of every movement. You shift your position again, adjusting the angle of your body as the sun continues to move, keeping yourself within that shrinking patch for as long as possible, and you begin to notice how this becomes almost a game of timing, a subtle dance between light and shadow that requires attention but not effort. It's not about stopping, it's about aligning. The breeze returns briefly, carrying heat rather than relief this time, and you feel it pass across your face dry and steady, offering movement but not cooling. And yet even that movement helps in small ways, preventing the air from becoming completely stagnant around you. You turn slightly into it, letting it pass across your chest and arms, working with whatever the environment offers, always adjusting, always responding. A rider ahead leans slightly against his saddle horn, using his own posture to create a bit of self-shade, angling his body so that less surface area faces the sun directly, and you realize how even positioning becomes a tool, a way of managing exposure without needing anything extra. You follow his example, lowering your shoulders just enough to reduce the direct hit of sunlight across your upper body. Small change, noticeable effect. Interestingly, some cowboys were known to carry simple canvas sheets or tarps on longer journeys, which could be used to create temporary shade when stopping for rest, though such items were not always practical to deploy during active movement, especially when managing cattle. Historians still argue about how common these portable solutions were, but the idea reflects the same principle: shade is valuable enough to justify effort even when it's inconvenient. The herd moves onward, leaving the rocks behind, and immediately you feel the full return of the sun pressing down without interruption. And for a moment the contrast makes it feel stronger than before. You adjust quickly, pulling your hat lower, shifting your bandana, letting your clothing take on more of the burden again. Nothing lasts long out here, not even shade. You glance towards your horse, noticing how its body casts a shadow that moves alongside you, and for a brief moment you lean slightly toward it, allowing that shadow to overlap with your leg, reducing the direct heat just enough to matter. It's not perfect, but it helps. The ground beneath continues to reflect heat upward, creating that layered sensation again where warmth comes from all directions, and you feel it more clearly now, the way it surrounds rather than strikes, making it harder to escape but not impossible to manage. You adjust your grip on the reins, the leather warm but protected by your gloves, and you become more aware of how every part of your body interacts with the environment, how every surface exposed to the sun contributes to the overall strain, and how reducing even a small portion of that exposure can extend your endurance. Historians still debate how much of this behavior was consciously taught versus learned through experience, with some suggesting that new cowboys quickly adapted by observing others, while others believe much of it came through trial and error, shaped by discomfort and necessity rather than instruction. Either way, standing here now, it feels less like a lesson and more like a natural response. The sun demands adjustment. You provide it. A faint shimmer appears again along the horizon, the air bending slightly under the intensity of heat, and you notice how it distorts distance, making objects seem closer or farther than they say are, adding another layer of complexity to an already demanding environment. You blink slowly, refocusing, grounding yourself in what you can actually see, not what the heat suggests. You roll your shoulders once more, easing tension before it builds too deeply, and shift your weight in the saddle, allowing your body to remain flexible rather than rigid, because stiffness traps heat and drains energy faster than movement does. It's another small balance. Stillness and motion, exposure and protection. You continue forward, scanning the land again, not expecting large shelters or easy solutions, but remaining open to the smallest opportunities, the briefest interruptions in sunlight that can offer even a moment of relief. And as the day presses on, steady and unrelenting, you realize something that feels almost quiet in its truth. Out here shade isn't something you wait for. It's something you notice, something you use, even when it barely exists. By early afternoon, the heat feels settled into a steady dominance, no longer rising, but fully present, pressing evenly across the land as if it has claimed everything within sight. And yet, just when it begins to feel predictable, the desert reminds you that it is never entirely stable, never fully understood because change can arrive without warning, subtle at first, then undeniable. You notice it not in the sky immediately, but in the air itself, a slight shift in movement, a different texture brushing across your skin, as if the wind has decided to return with a new intention. It starts quietly, almost easy to miss. A faint gust moves across the ground, lifting a thin veil of dust that drifts low before settling again, and you narrow your eyes slightly, sensing that this is not the same gentle movement from earlier, but something building, something gathering strength beyond what is immediately visible. The herd reacts before you fully do their movements, tightening slightly heads, shifting bodies, adjusting in small but noticeable ways. They feel it too. Animals always do. Cowboys learn to pay close attention to these subtle changes because in the open desert weather does not always announce itself with dramatic clouds or distant thunder, but can instead rise from the land itself, carried by wind and pressure, transforming the environment in minutes rather than hours. You shift in the saddle, your grip steady but ready, your awareness sharpening as the air begins to move more consistently. The wind picks up again, stronger now. Dust lifts higher this time, swirling into loose spirals that stretch briefly before breaking apart, and you feel the particles strike lightly against your clothing, your face protected only by the narrow margin of your hat and the edge of your bandana. The sound changes too, a soft, continuous hiss as grains of sand move across the surface of the earth, carried in restless patterns. You pull your bandana up, cover your mouth, breathe slower. Interestingly, sudden dust storms were not uncommon in parts of the American West, sometimes forming with little warning as shifting air currents lifted loose soil into the atmosphere, though historians still debate how frequently these events disrupted cattle drives compared to the more gradual, predictable patterns of daily heat. Even so, the possibility was always there, and preparation often came down to instinct rather than instruction. The wind strengthens again, and now it pushes against you not enough to unbalance, but enough to demand attention, and you angle your body slightly, reducing resistance while maintaining control of your horse. The animal beneath you shifts its stance, bracing subtly, ears flicking as it responds to both the wind and the movement of the herd. Dust thickens, visibility narrows, the horizon begins to fade. You keep your eyes focused low, avoiding the worst of the airborne grit, and rely more on sound and proximity than distant sight, listening to the steady movement of hooves, the low calls of other riders, the shifting mass of cattle adjusting as one. It becomes a different kind of navigation, less visual, more instinctive. A rider to your left moves closer, not out of panic, but coordination, ensuring that the line holds even as visibility drops, and you follow suit, tightening the spacing just enough to maintain awareness without crowding. There is no need for shouted orders. Everyone understands. The wind continues its push, steady and insistent, and for a moment it feels as though the heat has changed, not reduced but redistributed, carried differently through the moving air. Less concentrated in one place but more unpredictable in how it touches your skin. It's not relief, but it's different. You adjust, again keeping your bandana secure, your hat low, your posture balanced, and you feel the strain not as exhaustion but as heightened awareness, your body working more actively to maintain control under changing conditions. This is part of it too, not just heat, but interruption. Historians still argue about how often cowboys were forced to halt entirely during sudden weather shifts, with some accounts describing brief slowdowns rather than full stops, while others suggest that certain storms could delay movement significantly. Standing here now, it becomes clear that stopping isn't always an option. Sometimes you move through it carefully, deliberately. The wind begins to ease after a while. Not abruptly, but gradually, the dust settling back to the ground in uneven patterns, the air clearing just enough for the horizon to return in faint outlines, and you feel the shift again. The tension easing slightly from your shoulders as visibility improves. The herd relaxes. The line stretches back out. The rhythm returns. You lower your bandana slowly, letting the air touch your face again now, carrying the same dry heat as before, but without the sharp edge of moving dust, and you take a steady breath, grounding yourself as the environment settles into its earlier state. The sun remains, unchanged above it all, as if nothing happened. You glance once more across the land, now calm again, and you realize how quickly conditions can shift, how the desert holds both consistency and unpredictability at the same time, never fully one or the other. And as you guide your horse forward, rejoining the steady movement of the herd, you carry that awareness with you, quiet but firm. Out here, survival isn't just about enduring what you expect. It's about adapting to what you don't. Word count 1168. Awaiting continue. Viết liền mạch hạn chế xuống dòng không cần thiết. Got it from here on. I'll keep it fully lean, map continuous, minimal line breaks, just one dense flowing paragraph per section, still respecting sentence rhythm. Section 14. The afternoon settles into that long, quiet stretch where time feels slower. Not because it actually is, but because the heat presses evenly across everything, softening urgency and encouraging restraint. And as you continue forward with the herd, you begin to notice how even food and water are no longer separate concerns, but part of a single system that must be carefully balanced if you intend to last through the day without draining yourself too quickly. Your stomach feels faintly hollow, and not sharply hungry, just aware, and you reach down almost instinctively toward your supplies, already mefty knowing that whatever you eat now must serve a purpose beyond simple satisfaction. It's never just about eating, it's about lasting. You pull out a small portion of the trail food, something dry, compact and reliable, and as you bring it to your mouth, you chew slowly, deliberately, letting your body process it without strain because digestion itself requires energy. And under this kind of heat, even internal effort must be managed carefully. The taste is simple, familiar, slightly salted, designed not for pleasure, but for preservation. And you feel how it lingers, encouraging slower bites, preventing waste, stretching both time and supply in a way that feels intentional rather than limiting. Cowboys often relied on foods like jerky beans and hard bread, not only because they lasted, but because they provided steady energy without requiring additional preparation during the hottest hours, reducing the need for fire and minimizing exertion when the body was already under stress. You take a small sip of water, just enough to support the food, and you pause again, letting it settle, because drinking too much at once can dilute your sense of control, leaving you thirstier later, while too little can make eating feel heavy and uncomfortable. And so you find yourself constantly adjusting, measuring not by strict rules, but by sensation, by awareness, by a growing familiarity with how your body responds under these conditions. Interestingly, some cowboys would suck on small objects like pebbles or bits of leather to stimulate saliva production, creating the illusion of moisture and reducing the immediate feeling of thirst. Though historians still debate how common or effective this method truly was, with some suggesting it was more anecdotal than widespread. The sun remains steady, unchanging in its position now, but the heat it produces feels deeper, more embedded, and you notice how your body begins to favor efficiency over speed, reducing unnecessary movement, conserving strength, not just for the present moment, but for the hours still ahead. The herd moves in a slow, consistent flow, and you match it without thought, your actions becoming more automatic, less reactive, shaped by repetition rather than decision. Dust rises lightly with each step settling against your clothes, your face, your hands, and you use your bandana again, wiping briefly, then letting it fall back into place, continuing its quiet work without interruption. Historians still argue about how much nutritional planning went into long cattle drives, with some suggesting a fairly structured approach to food distribution, while others describe a more flexible system shaped by availability and circumstance. But standing here now, it feels less like a plan and more like a rhythm, something learned through repetition rather than designed in advance. You don't count calories, you don't measure portions precisely, you simply adjust, responding to the conditions, to your energy, to the slow accumulation of heat that defines the day. A faint breeze passes, again thinner, now carrying more warmth and relief, and you turn slightly into it out of habit, letting it move across your chest and arms, taking whatever small benefit it offers, because even the slightest cooling can extend your comfort just enough to matter. You notice how your body feels, neither fully strained nor fully relaxed, existing somewhere in between, balanced carefully on the edge of effort and conservation. And you understand that this balance is not accidental but maintained through constant quiet awareness. You take another bite slower this time, then stop deciding it's enough for now, because overeating under this heat can weigh you down, making movement feel heavier, breathing feel tighter, and so you store the rest away, not out of scarcity alone, but out of discipline. Everything is measured. Everything is intentional. The sun continues its steady watch. The land remains open and unchanged, and yet within that consistency you continue to adapt in small, nearly invisible ways. And as you ride forward, chewing the last of your food, feeling the dryness in the air and the steady warmth against your skin, you realize something that settles quietly into your understanding, something that doesn't need to be spoken aloud. Out here, survival isn't about how much you have, it's about how carefully you use it. The afternoon stretches onward with a kind of quiet persistence, and as the heat settles deeper into the land, you begin to notice that the challenge is no longer just physical, but something softer and harder to define. Something that sits at the edge of your thoughts, shaped by distance, light, and the strange stillness that comes from riding through a place that rarely changes in obvious ways. The horizon wavers slightly now, bending under the weight of heat, and you catch yourself staring at it longer than necessary, watching shapes form and dissolve, unsure whether what you see is real or simply suggested by the shifting air. It plays with your eyes. It plays with your mind. Mirages appear without warning. Thin pools of shimmering light that resemble water from a distance, reflecting the sky in a way that feels convincing enough to make you look twice, sometimes even 3 times, before the illusion breaks apart as you draw closer. Cowboys knew these tricks well, or at least they learned at them quickly, because chasing what isn't there wastes time, energy and focus, and in a place like this, those are resources you cannot afford to lose. You blink slowly, letting your vision reset and focus instead on what remains stable. The movement of the herd, the shape of the ground beneath you, the steady rhythm of your horse, grounding yourself in what can be trusted rather than what only appears convincing. It's a subtle shift, but an important one, because the longer you ride, the more the mind begins to wander, pulled by repetition, by heat, by the absence of clear landmarks. The silence doesn't help. It stretches, it lingers. There are moments when the only sound is the soft thud of hooves and the faint creak of leather, and in those moments your thoughts seem louder, more present, filling the space left by everything else. You think about water, about shade, about the distance still ahead, not in a worried way, but in a steady looping rhythm that mirrors the movement of the ride itself. Interestingly, some accounts suggest that cowboys would talk, hum, or even sing quietly during long stretches of travel, not for entertainment exactly, but to maintain focus and keep their minds from drifting too far into distraction or fatigue. Though historians still debate how common this behaviour truly was across different drives and regions. Whether spoken or silent, the mind needs something to hold on to. You adjust your posture slightly, sitting a bit straighter in the saddle, bringing your attention back to your body, to the feel of the reins in your hands, the movement of the horse beneath you, the texture of your clothing against your skin. These small physical anchors help steady your thoughts, pulling you back from the drifting edge where heat and monotony begin to blur together. The sun remains relentless, its light now flattening the land into long stretches of pale colour, reducing contrast, making distance harder to judge, and you notice how easily the eye can be misled under these conditions, how something far away can seem close and something near can fade into the background if you're not paying attention. It's not just the heat you're managing, it's perception. Historians still argue about how much psychological strain cowboys experienced during long cattle drives, with some describing a kind of quiet resilience built through routine, while others suggest that isolation and repetition could wear on the mind just as much as physical hardship. Sitting here now, watching the horizon ripple and shift, it becomes clear that both can be true. You feel it in small ways, not overwhelming, but present, a flicker of distraction, a moment of uncertainty, a brief sense of distance that feels longer than it is. You respond the only way you can, by narrowing your focus, by returning again and again to what is immediate, what is real, what is within reach. The herd moves, you follow, the horse breathes, you listen. The ground shifts, you adjust. These simple patterns become your anchor, steadying you against the subtle pull of illusion and fatigue, keeping you aligned with the reality of the moment rather than the distortions created by heat and distance. You lift your bandana, briefly wiping your face, grounding yourself in the physical sensation of movement, then let it fall back into place. The air remains dry, the taste of dust faint but constant, and as you breathe, you become aware again of how even this simple act requires attention, how the body continues to work quietly in the background, maintaining balance despite the conditions pressing against it. You don't fight the environment, you adapt to it, gradually, constantly. The mirage fades again as you move forward, replaced by the same endless stretch of land, and you no longer feel the need to question it because you've learned to trust the rhythm of movement more than the tricks of the eye. The sun remains high, the heat steady, the path unchanged, and within their sameness your awareness sharpens rather than dulls. And as you continue riding steady and unhurried, you realize something that settles quietly into your thoughts, something that feels less like a realization and more like an understanding that has been building all along. Out here, survival isn't just about the body, it's about the mind, knowing what to trust and knowing what to let pass. The heat begins to loosen its grip as the sun drifts lower, and with that slow shift the world seems to open again. Not cooler all at once, but softer, less insistent. And as the herd settles into an easier rhythm, you feel your own thoughts begin to stretch outward, no longer held tightly in place by the demands of the afternoon. And it's in this quieter stretch that voices return low and unhurried, drifting between riders in a way that feels almost as natural as the movement of the cattle themselves. Conversation out here isn't constant, but when it comes, it carries weight not in what is said, but in how it fills the space left behind by heat and silence. You hear a voice nearby, steady and calm, recounting something that sounds familiar. A story of a long drive, a dry stretch, a moment when water ran low, and decisions had to be made carefully. And though the details may shift with each telling, the shape of the story remains the same, built around endurance, adaptation, and the quiet tension of not knowing exactly what comes next. These stories pass between cowboys not just as entertainment, but as a way of sharing experience of turning past hardship into something useful, something that can be carried forward. They sound simple, but they stay with you. Cowboys often shared stories at the end of long days, sometimes around a small fire, sometimes while still riding, using them as a way to pass time and reinforce the lessons learned through experience. Though historians still debate how much of these tales were strictly factual and how much were shaped by exaggeration, memory, or the natural tendency to make hardship feel meaningful after it has passed. Either way, the effect is the same. You listen without interrupting, letting the words settle into the rhythm of the ride, and you notice how your body responds, relaxing slightly, your breathing evening out, your focus widening beyond the immediate demands of movement and heat. The story continues, describing a moment when a rider ignored the signs of the land, pushed too far without adjusting, and found himself struggling as a result, not dramatically, not suddenly, but in the slow accumulating way that most challenges appear out here. It's not a warning, not directly, but it carries one. You shift in the saddle, feeling the familiar creak of leather, and glance briefly toward the speaker, though his face is partially hidden beneath the brim of his hat, his expression unreadable but steady, shaped more by experience than emotion. There's no urgency in his voice, no attempt to impress, just a quiet delivery that suggests the story has been told many times before, and will be told again. The air moves more gently now, carrying less heat, and you feel it brush against your skin with a softness that wasn't there earlier. And for a moment you let yourself notice the difference fully, the way your shoulders feel lighter, your hands less tense, your thoughts less confined. The day is easing, gradually, slowly, predictably. You take a slow breath, the dryness still present but less demanding, and you realize how much of your attention throughout the day has been focused on managing the environment, adjusting constantly, responding to heat, to light, to movement. And now with that pressure reduced even slightly, there is space for something else. Reflection, not deep, just enough. Historians still argue about the role of storytelling in cowboy culture, with some viewing it as a central part of daily life and others suggesting it was more occasional, shaped by circumstance and personality rather than routine. But standing here now, listening to the quiet exchange of words between riders, it feels less like a formal tradition and more like a natural extension of the experience itself. You learn by doing. You remember by telling. The herd continues forward, steady as ever, and the light shifts again, stretching shadows across the ground in long, soft lines that move with you, creating a sense of depth that was missing during the harsh brightness of midday. You watch those shadows for a moment, noticing how they lengthen, how they change shape, how they remind you that time is moving forward even when it feels still. The story ends without a clear conclusion, fading naturally as the rider falls quiet again and no one asks for more. No one fills the silence immediately because it doesn't need to be filled. The lesson has already settled. You carry it with you, quietly. You adjust your hat slightly, letting the brim lift just enough to take in the changing light, and you feel the air again cooler now, moving more freely across your face, and you realize how much easier it is to think, to notice, to simply exist when the heat is no longer pressing so firmly against you. But you don't forget it. You can't. The sun will rise again. The heat will return. And when it does, everything you've heard, everything you've experienced will shape how you respond, not through conscious effort, but through habit, through memory, through the quiet accumulation of understanding that builds over time. And as you ride on, listening to the soft sounds of the herd and the fading echoes of conversation, you realize something that feels almost gentle in its certainty. Out here, survival isn't just learned alone. It's shared, passed from one voice to another, until it becomes part of you. The light softens further as the day begins its slow descent into evening, and with that change your attention drifts once more to the objects you carry, the tools that have quietly supported you through every hour of heat without demanding notice, and you begin to realize that survival out here is not built on a single solution, but on a collection of small dependable items, each one designed not to solve everything but to reduce strain in just one specific way. You shift slightly in the saddle, feeling the familiar creak beneath you, and your hand rests briefly on the saddle horn, its surface warm but no longer hot-shaped by use and time, into something that feels almost like an extension of your own body. It's easy to overlook these things until you need them. The saddle itself plays a larger role than you might expect, distributing your weight across the horse in a way that reduces fatigue for both of you, while also providing a stable position that allows you to ride longer without constant adjustment. And as the hours pass, you begin to understand how important that stability becomes, not just for comfort, but for conserving energy. A poorly balanced saddle would shift, forcing you to correct your posture again and again, each movement small on its own, but exhausting when repeated over time. You adjust your position slightly, letting your weight settle more evenly, and you feel the difference immediately, subtle but real, a reduction in effort that allows your body to relax just enough to matter. The reins in your hands, worn smooth from use, respond easily to your touch, requiring minimal force to guide your horse, and you realize how much thought has gone into even the simplest tools, shaping them to work with you rather than against you. Cowboys relied heavily on durable multi-purpose equipment items that could withstand heat dust and constant use without failing, because out here a broken tool was more than an inconvenience. It was a risk, something that could slow you down or force you to adapt under already difficult conditions. That's why materials mattered, why leather was thick, why stitching was reinforced, why every piece was chosen for reliability rather than appearance. You glance down at your belt where small items hang in quiet readiness, a knife perhaps or a length of rope, each one carrying its own purpose, its own role in the larger system of survival, and though you may not use them all every day, their presence provides a kind of assurance, a sense that you are prepared for more than just the expected. Prepared for change, Prepared for problems. The air moves gently now, carrying less heat, and as it brushes against your face, you notice how your body responds more easily. Your movement's less restricted, you're breathing deeper, and it allows you to pay attention to details you might have missed earlier, like the way your gloves fit against your hands, protecting not just from heat, but from friction, from the constant contact with reins and equipment that could otherwise wear down your skin over time. Interestingly, some cowboys customize their gear extensively, modifying saddles, reins, and clothing to better suit their individual needs, though historians still debate how widespread these personal adjustments were, with some suggesting they were common among experienced riders, while others believe most equipment remained relatively standardized due to availability and cost. Either way, the goal remained the same. Reduce effort, increase endurance. You shift your grip slightly, feeling the leather respond, and you notice how even the smallest change in hand position can alter how much strain you feel spreading. Pressure more evenly, reducing fatigue over time. These are not dramatic adjustments, but they add up. The herd continues forward, steady and calm, and you match that rhythm without thinking, your body moving in sync with the motion of your horse, guided as much by habit as by intention. And within that rhythm, the tools you carry fade into the background, doing their work without drawing attention to themselves. That's how they're meant to function, quietly, reliably. Historians still argue about how much innovation occurred in cowboy equipment during the peak years of cattle drives, with some pointing to gradual improvements influenced by earlier traditions, while others suggest that most tools remained largely unchanged, refined more through use than redesign. But from where you sit now, the distinction feels less important than the result. It works, and because it works, you continue. The sun dips lower, casting longer shadows once again, and the heat begins its slow retreat, though its presence still lingers in the ground, in your clothes, in the faint warmth of the air, and you feel the gradual easing of strain as your body adjusts once more, transitioning from endurance to recovery. You roll your shoulders, gently easing tension that built throughout the day, and adjust your posture one last time, letting your weight settle, naturally supported by the saddle, guided by the reins, protected by the tools that have carried you this far. And as you ride forward into the softening light, you realize something that feels almost understated in its importance. Out here, survival isn't just about strength or knowledge. It's about what you carry and how well it carries you. The light begins to soften into that familiar golden tone again, and as the land stretches quietly ahead, you start to notice how your attention shifts almost automatically toward one thing above all else, something that has been present in your thoughts all day, sometimes quietly, sometimes more insistently, and now returns to the front of your awareness as the heat slowly eases just enough to allow a wider focus. Water. Not just the water you carry, but the water that might exist somewhere out there, hidden within the folds of the land, waiting to be found or remembered. You scan the horizon more carefully now, not for shade this time, but for subtle changes that might suggest moisture, and your eyes move slowly across the terrain, noticing variations that once seemed insignificant but now feel loaded with possibility. A darker line of earth, a cluster of greener plants, a slight dip where the ground seems to gather rather than spread. None of these guarantee anything, but they hint, and out here hints matter. Cowboys often relied on known water sources mapped through experienced rivers, wells, or established watering holes that became essential points along long cattle drives, and missing one of these could mean significant trouble, not just for the riders, but for the herd itself, which required regular access to water to remain manageable and healthy. Planning routes around these locations was critical, though historians still debate how precise these routes were in practice, especially in less familiar territories where knowledge might be incomplete or outdated. You notice a faint line of trees in the distance, barely visible at first, their shape blending into the horizon until you focus more closely and something about them feels different from the scattered vegetation you've passed earlier. Taller, denser, more consistent. Trees like that don't appear without reason. You feel a small shift of attention ripple through the group, subtle, unspoken, but shared. The herd begins to angle slightly in that direction, Not abruptly, not dramatically, just a gradual adjustment guided by the riders, and you follow your horse, responding easily as the path shifts. The ground beneath changes slowly, becoming less brittle, the cracks in the earth less pronounced, and you notice the colour deepening just slightly enough to suggest that moisture may be closer to the surface here. The air feels different too. Not cooler exactly, but fuller. You take a slow breath and there's a faint scent beneath the dryness. Something earthy, something that carries the memory of water even if it isn't immediately visible, and your body responds to it almost instinctively, your focus sharpening your movements, becoming a little more alert. It's close, or at least closer. Interestingly, some cowboys were said to rely on animal behaviour to locate water, watching how cattle moved or where birds gathered, though historians still argue about how reliable these methods were compared to established knowledge of the land. Even so, the idea reflects the same underlying truth. You look for patterns, you follow signs. As you approach the trees, the ground softens slightly under your horse's hooves, not muddy but less rigid, and the sound changes just enough to notice a duller impact, a quieter response, and you feel a small sense of confirmation building. Not certainty yet, but something close. The herd picks up a subtle energy, not excitement, but anticipation. You move closer still, and now you can see it not all at once, but in pieces. A darker patch beneath the trees, a faint glimmer where light catches something reflective, and as the distance closes, the shape becomes clearer. A shallow water source, perhaps a stream or a small pond enough to sustain enough to matter. Relief settles in. Quiet, controlled, but real. Cowboys depended on these moments not just for hydration, but for resetting the balance of the entire system, allowing both riders and cattle to recover, to prepare for the next stretch, to restore what had been steadily depleted throughout the day. Water wasn't just a resource. It was a turning point. You guide your horse forward, slowing as you near the edge, allowing the animals to approach in an orderly way, preventing chaos, because even relief must be managed carefully to avoid unnecessary strain or risk. The sound of water becomes clearer now. A faint movement, a soft ripple that feels almost out of place after so many hours of dryness. You hear it, you feel it. You notice how the air cools just slightly near the surface, how the scent becomes stronger, richer, and how your body responds not just with thirst, but with a kind of easing, a release of tension that you may not have fully noticed until now. Historians still debate how reliable these watering points were over time, with some accounts describing consistent access along well-travelled routes, while others suggest that droughts and seasonal changes could make even known sources unpredictable. Standing here now, it's easy to understand why every successful find would be remembered, shared and relied upon as much as possible. You allow your horse to drink, watching carefully, ensuring it doesn't rush too quickly, because even that must be controlled, and as you kneel, briefly dipping your hand into the water, you feel the coolness spread across your skin, a sensation so different from the heat that it almost feels surprising. Simple, but powerful. You take a measured drink yourself, slower than you might want, letting it settle, respecting the same balance that has guided you all day, and as the water moves through you, you feel not just relief but renewal, a quiet restoration that prepares you for what comes next. And as the sun continues its slow descent, casting long shadows across the water's surface, you realize something that feels steady and certain. Out here, water isn't just survival, it's continuation. The presence of water lingers with you even as the herd begins to move again, not just in your body, but in your awareness, sharpening your attention to how the cattle respond, because their needs are not separate from yours. And as the day begins to lean further into evening, you start to understand that managing the herd under heat is less about control and more about guidance, about knowing when to push and when to ease, when to direct and when to simply allow movement to unfold naturally. You sit a little taller in the saddle, watching how the animals behave. Now, their pace slightly renewed after drinking, but still tempered by the long hours behind them, and you match that balance carefully, resisting the urge to rush simply because conditions have improved. You keep them steady. That matters more. Cattle, like horses, feel the heat deeply, and when pushed too hard under a strong sun, they can become restless, unpredictable, even dangerous to manage. which is why cowboys paid close attention to timing, spacing, and the movement, ensuring that the herd remained calm rather than forced, because calm cattle conserve energy, and energy once lost is not easily regained on the trail. You guide your horse along the edge of the group, making small adjustments with the reins, subtle shifts that influence direction without creating stress, and you notice how responsive the animals are when handled this way.
But
guided, the ground beneath you feels slightly cooler now, though the heat still lingers in patches rising faintly from sun-soaked areas, and you remain aware of how quickly conditions can change, how easily a moment of relief can fade if not respected. The herd spreads just slightly and you adjust again, narrowing the gap without forcing it, keeping the movement fluid, because tight clustering can create its own problems, especially as the air begins to cool unevenly across the land. Interestingly, some cowboys develop specific calls or sounds to help guide cattle, without relying on constant physical pressure, using voice as a tool to maintain order, though historians still debate how standardized these techniques were, with some suggesting they varied widely depending on the region and individual style. You hear a low call nearby, steady and familiar, and you notice how the cattle respond not dramatically, but enough to shift their direction, just slightly reinforcing the sense that control out here is often subtle rather than direct. The light continues to soften, stretching shadows longer across the ground, and with that change the herd begins to settle more naturally, their movements less driven, more instinctive, and you feel the tension ease slightly from your own posture as the need for constant adjustment decreases. This is the transition, from effort to maintenance, from strain to balance. Historians still argue about how difficult it truly was to manage large herds under extreme heat, with some accounts emphasizing constant challenges, and others describing a more stable rhythm once both riders and cattle adapted to the conditions. From where you sit now, it feels like both are true at once, because while the work never fully stops, it becomes more predictable, more manageable, shaped by experience rather than reaction. You shift your weight slightly, allowing your body to relax into the movement of your horse, conserving energy now that the most intense part of the day has passed, and you notice how your breathing feels deeper, more even, no longer restricted by the dry pressure of midday heat. The air carries a different quality now, still warm, but gentler. You watch the cattle, closely noting how they move, how they cluster and spread, how they respond to terrain and light, and you realize that much of this work depends on observation rather than force, on understanding patterns. Rather than imposing control, you don't drive them forward. You move with them. The herd slows slightly as the ground shifts again, and you guide your horse to maintain position, ensuring that no animal drifts too far from the group, because separation can lead to confusion, and confusion can ripple outward quickly if not addressed early. You make the correction quietly without urgency, and the herd adjusts in response, the balance restored without disruption. Small actions, immediate effects. The sun lowers further, casting a warm glow across the land, and you feel the gradual release of heat from your body, the tension easing from your shoulders, your hands, your back, and you take a slow breath, letting it settle, aware of how much of the day has been spent managing not just the environment but the living system around you. Cowboys often describe this work as a kind of partnership, not just with their horses, but with the herd itself, learning its rhythms, its tendencies, its reactions to heat, movement and sound, though historians still debate how much of this language reflects practical reality versus later romantic interpretation. Even so, the idea holds weight. You feel it now, in the movement, in the quiet coordination. As the herd continues forward under the softening light, you guide them with steady hands and measured attention, no longer pushing against the day, but moving with it, allowing the natural rhythm of evening to shape your pace. And as you ride on, watching the cattle settle into their calmer state, you realize something that feels steady, grounded, and quietly important. Out here, survival isn't just about enduring the heat. It's about knowing how to carry others through it too. The last stretch of daylight carries a quiet kind of weight, not heavy like the heat of midday, but thoughtful, as if the land itself is reflecting on what it has taken, and what it has allowed you to keep. And as you ride alongside the herd, you begin to notice the subtle signs your body gives when pushed too far under the sun. Signals that are easy to ignore at first, but grow clearer with experience, becoming warnings you learn to respect rather than dismiss. You feel a slight heaviness in your limbs, not quite exhaustion, but something close, and your breath, though steady, carries a dryness that lingers longer than it should. You recognize it now. The early edge of strain. Heat exhaustion did not arrive suddenly for most cowboys, but built gradually, often unnoticed, until it reached a point where recovery became more difficult, which is why awareness mattered so much, the ability to recognize small changes in how your body felt and respond before those changes became problems. You shift slightly in the saddle, easing your posture, letting your body relax where it can, reducing unnecessary tension that might add to the strain already present. You slow your movements. You conserve what remains. The air continues to cool, but not enough to erase the effects of the day. And you notice how your skin still holds warmth, how your clothes retain the memory of heat, and how your muscles respond more slowly than they did in the morning. These are not alarming signs, but they matter. Interestingly, some cowboys believe that steady pacing and controlled breathing were the most effective ways to prevent heat-related illness, focusing less on dramatic solutions and more on maintaining balance throughout the day. Though historians still debate how much of this understanding was formal knowledge versus practical habit developed through experience. Either way, the result was the same. You learn to listen to your body, or you pay for it. You take a slow breath deeper than before, letting it settle into your chest, and you feel the slight dryness at the back of your throat. A reminder to take another measured sip of water, not out of urgency, but out of maintenance. You reach for your canteen, lift it carefully, and drink just enough to support your body without overwhelming it, letting the water sip briefly before swallowing. Small sip, lasting effect. The herd continues to move steadily, their own fatigue visible in the slower rhythm of their steps, the way they cluster more closely, conserving energy as the day comes to an end, and you adjust your pace to match, ensuring that no additional strain is placed on them during this final stretch. You don't push now, you guide gently. Historians still argue about how frequently cowboys encountered serious heat stroke on the trail, with some accounts describing it as a constant risk and others suggesting it was relatively rare when proper pacing and hydration were maintained. Standing here now, feeling the subtle signals in your own body, it becomes clear that the danger lies not in the obvious, but in the gradual, in the slow accumulation of stress that builds without announcement. You roll your shoulders again, easing stiffness, and adjust your grip on the reins, allowing your hands to relax slightly, reducing tension that could otherwise spread through your arms and into your back. Every small adjustment helps, even now, especially now. The light continues to fade, and with it the heat begins to release its hold more noticeably, though not completely, and you feel that transition in waves moments, where the air feels almost cool, followed by lingering warmth rising from the ground. It's uneven, but it's enough. You take another slow breath, and this time it feels easier, fuller, and you recognize that your body is beginning to recover, shifting out of the steady strain of the day and into something closer to rest, though not fully there yet. Not until you stop. A rider nearby adjusts his hat, wiping his brow with the edge of his sleeve, and you notice the same signs in him. The same quiet fatigue, the same careful movements, and it reinforces the understanding that this is shared. That everyone out here moves through the same cycle, facing the same challenges, adapting in similar ways. No one is untouched by the heat, only prepared for it. You guide your horse forward as the herd begins to slow further, the rhythm easing into something calmer, more controlled, and you allow yourself to settle into that pace. No longer managing the peak of the day, but still respecting what it has taken from you. Recovery takes time. Even here, the sky deepens in colour, the sun nearing the horizon, and you feel the last of the day's intensity begin to lift from your shoulders, your arms, your breath, and you realise how important this transition is, not just physically but mentally, the shift from endurance to restoration. And as you ride into the fading light, aware of your body, your limits, and your steady return to balance, you understand something that feels quiet but certain. Out here, survival isn't about avoiding the heat entirely. It's about knowing how to come back from it. The evening settles in with a quiet sense of release, And as the heat loosens its hold once more, your thoughts begin to drift towards something deeper than routine, something carried not just in your own experience but in the knowledge that came before you passed along through observation, adaptation, and quiet respect for the land itself. You notice how many of the habits you've followed throughout the day, the way you dress, the way you ride, the way you search for water and shade feel less like inventions and more like inheritances shaped long before you arrived here. You didn't create these methods. You stepped into them. Much of what cowboys practiced in surviving desert heat was influenced by the knowledge of indigenous peoples who had lived in these environments for generations, developing ways of reading the land, conserving water and managing exposure that were refined through time rather than trial alone. This knowledge was not always formally taught and often not openly credited, but it moved quietly between cultures absorbed through contact necessity and shared experience on the same harsh terrain. You look out across the land again, seeing it not just as a challenge, but as something that has already been understood by others in ways you're still learning, and that realization shifts your perspective slightly, making your own efforts feel less isolated, more connected to a longer line of survival. The patterns you follow, the adjustments you make, they are part of something larger, something older. Interestingly, indigenous groups across the American West often use strategies such as traveling during cooler parts of the day, wearing protective clothing suited to the climate, and identifying water sources through detailed environmental knowledge. Though historians still debate how directly these practices influence cowboy routines versus developing in parallel due to similar environmental pressures. Even so, the overlap is difficult to ignore. The land teaches everyone, in its own way. You adjust your position slightly, feeling the saddle beneath you, the familiar support that has carried you through another long day, and you consider how even your tools reflect a blend of influences, designs, shaped over time through cultural exchange, practical need, and adaptation to specific conditions. Nothing here feels entirely original. Everything feels refined. The air moves gently now, cooler, carrying with it the faint scent of earth that has begun to release the heat it held throughout the day, and you take a slow breath, letting that change settle into your body as your muscles begin to relax more fully. The herd moves calmly, their earlier fatigue giving way to a quieter rhythm, and you guide them without effort, your movements now almost automatic. This is the easier part, but it's earned. Historians still argue about how much interaction occurred between cowboys and indigenous communities on a day-to-day basis, with some accounts describing close cooperation and others suggesting more limited contact depending on region and circumstance. But regardless of the specifics, the influence of shared environment is clear, because survival techniques tend to converge when conditions demand it. You don't need instruction to learn from the land. You need attention. You glance toward the ground, noticing again the subtle signs. You've come to recognize the variations in color, the patterns of growth, the quiet indicators of what lies beneath the surface, and you realize how much of this knowledge has become instinctive, not through formal teaching, but through repetition, through observation, through the steady accumulation of experience. You feel it now. In how you look, in how you move. The sky deepens further, shifting from gold to softer shades of orange and red, and you watch as the light spreads across the horizon, stretching long shadows that move with the herd, creating a sense of depth and distance that feels almost calming after the flat intensity of midday. The heat continues to fade. Gradually, consistently, you adjust your hat slightly, letting the cooler air reach your face more freely, and you notice how your body responds with a quiet sense of relief. You're breathing deeper, your thoughts clearer, your awareness no longer narrowed by the constant pressure of heat. This is where understanding settles in, not during the hardest moments, but after them. You guide your horse forward as the herd begins to slow once more, preparing to settle for the night, and you feel that familiar transition again from movement to rest, from effort to recovery. And within that shift, you carry with you not just what you've done, but what you've learned. And as you ride into the fading light, aware of the layers of knowledge that shape your actions, both seen and unseen, you realize something that feels steady and grounded. Out here, survival isn't just personal. It's shared across time. Carried forward one quiet habit at a time, the sky deepens into evening once more, and as the last warmth of the sun fades into a softer, lingering glow along the horizon, you begin to notice a shift, not just in temperature but in purpose, because the work does not always end with daylight, and sometimes the cooler hours of night offer an opportunity that the heat of the day simply cannot. You feel it in the air first, that gentle drop in temperature, subtle but steady, easing the strain on your body, allowing your movements to feel lighter, more responsive, and as the herd continues forward, there is a quiet understanding among the riders that this is a time when progress can be made more comfortably, more efficiently. Night riding wasn't always necessary, but when conditions allowed, it became a valuable strategy, letting cowboys cover distance without the constant pressure of the sun, and as you guide your horse under the dimming sky, you begin to understand why. The air feels easier to breathe, the dryness still present but less demanding, and your body responds with a renewed sense of energy that contrasts sharply with the slow fatigue of the afternoon. You move forward more freely, not faster, but easier. The moon begins to rise, casting a pale, steady light across the land, and though it doesn't illuminate everything, it reveals enough to guide your path, enough to keep the herd together, enough to maintain that careful balance between movement and control. Shadows stretch differently now, softer, less defined, blending into the landscape in ways that require a different kind of attention. You rely less on sight, more on rhythm. The sound of hooves becomes more important, the steady familiar pattern guiding your awareness as much as your eyes do, and you listen closely, noticing any change in pace, any disruption in the flow that might signal a problem. The cattle move more calmly now, their earlier restlessness eased by the cooler air, and you guide them with gentle adjustments, maintaining direction without unnecessary effort. Interestingly, some cowboys preferred night riding not just for the cooler temperatures but for the calmer behavior of cattle, which were less agitated without the intensity of sunlight, though historians still debate how commonly this practice was used across different regions and drives. Even so, the logic is clear: less heat, less strain, more control. You adjust your posture slightly, feeling the difference in your body, how your muscles respond more quickly, how your breathing feels deeper, and you realize how much of the day's difficulty was tied not just to the work itself, but to the environment in which it was done. Remove the sun and everything changes. Not completely, but enough. The night air carries a different set of sounds now, insects moving through the darkness, distant calls that echo softly across the open land, and the occasional rustle of movement that feels more pronounced without the distractions of daylight. You remain attentive, not tense, but aware, because visibility is reduced and awareness must compensate. Historians still argue about how safe night riding truly was, with some accounts describing it as efficient and practical, while others point to increased risks from uneven terrain or unexpected obstacles. Sitting here now, moving carefully under the dim light, it becomes clear that both perspectives hold truth. It depends on attention, on experience, on balance. You guide your horse with steady hands, allowing it to navigate the terrain with its own instincts as much as your direction, and you feel that partnership again stronger now in the absence of clear sight built on trust rather than control. The ground shifts beneath you, subtle changes in texture and elevation, and you respond without hesitation, your body adjusting naturally to maintain balance. The herd continues forward, their movements smooth and consistent, and you notice how the cooler air allows for longer stretches of steady progress without the need for frequent rest, extending the productive hours of the day into the night in a way that feels both practical and necessary. You take a slow breath, the air filling your lungs more easily now, and you feel a quiet sense of relief, not because the work is easier, but because the strain is less constant, less pressing, allowing you to operate within a more comfortable range. The moon climbs higher, its light spreading wider across the land, and though it never matches the clarity of day, it provides enough guidance to continue, enough to maintain direction, enough to keep the rhythm intact. And as you ride on through the quiet night, guided by sound movement and the soft glow above you, realize something that settles gently into your thoughts. Out here, survival isn't tied to the sun, it's about knowing when to move with it. and when to move without it. The night carries you forward for a time steady and quiet until the horizon begins to lighten once again, and with that slow return of day you feel a familiar awareness settle in. Not dread exactly, but recognition, because the cycle is repeating, and what felt manageable in the dark will soon be tested again under the sun. You notice how your body responds to this transition, not with surprise, but with preparation, already adjusting before the heat fully arrives, because experience has taught you that survival out here depends less on reacting and more on anticipating. There is a certain image people carry about cowboys, one of constant toughness, of enduring everything without pause, without adjustment, as if strength alone were enough to carry a person through the demands of the land. But as you sit in the saddle, feeling the early warmth return, you begin to understand how incomplete that image is. Real endurance is quieter, less dramatic, more deliberate. Cowboys did not simply push through the heat without thought, they adapted to it constantly, adjusting their clothing, their pace, their habits, their expectations, because ignoring the environment was not a sign of strength. It was a mistake, one that could wear you down faster than any single hardship. You shift slightly, pulling your collar into place again as the first real rays of sunlight reach across the land and you feel the warmth settle in, familiar, now expected. You prepare before it builds. Interestingly, many later stews and films exaggerated the idea of rugged individualism, portraying cowboys as figures who relied solely on grit and determination, though historians still argue that the reality was far more collaborative and practical, shaped by shared knowledge, routine and careful planning rather than constant improvisation. Sitting here now, moving with the herd, that reality feels clear. This is not about proving anything, it's about continuing. To continue sing. The light grows stronger, the shadows shorten, and you begin to feel the same patterns returning, the slow rise of heat, the dryness in the air, the need to manage every movement with care, and yet this time it feels different. Not because the conditions have changed, but because you have. You notice more. You react earlier. You conserve better. The herd moves forward steady as ever, and you guide them with the same quiet adjustments, the same measured control. But now there is less hesitation in your actions, less uncertainty, because the rhythm of the day has become familiar, almost predictable in its demands. Historians still debate how much of cowboy resilience came from individual character versus learned behavior, with some emphasizing personal toughness, and others pointing to the importance of routine and adaptation. Out here, the distinction feels less important than the outcome. You endure by learning, not by resisting. You take a slow breath, the air already warming, and you reach for your canteen, taking a measured sip before the thirst fully sets in, staying ahead of the need rather than waiting for it to demand your attention. It's a small decision, but it changes everything. The sun rises higher, the heat begins its steady climb, and you feel it settle into your clothes, your skin, your breath, just as it did before. But this time you meet it differently, not with reaction, but with preparation, with the quiet confidence that comes from having already moved through it once. You adjust your hat, you shift your posture, you guide your pace, each action, small, almost automatic, yet deeply intentional, shaped by what you've already experienced, by what you've already learned. The land remains the same, but you don't. The dust lifts again. Beneath the hooves of the herd, the air begins to dry more noticeably, and the familiar challenges return, but they no longer feel uncertain, no longer feel unfamiliar, because you've already found your way through them once, and that knowledge stays with you, steady and reliable. And as the day begins again in full, the sun climbing, the heat building, the rhythm repeating, you realize something that settles quietly into your understanding, something that feels less like a realization and more like a truth you've grown into. Out here, survival isn't about being as tough as the stories say. It's about knowing how to adapt, again and again, until it becomes who you are. The day unfolds again with that same steady rhythm, but now it feels less like something you're entering and more like something you are already part of, as if the heat, the movement, and the quiet demands of the land have folded you into their pattern. And as you ride forward beneath the rising sun, you begin to notice how much of what once required thought now happens without it. Your hands adjust the reins without hesitation. Your posture shifts before discomfort settles in. Your attention moves naturally between the herd, the ground, and the horizon. And all of it happens in a quiet flow that feels less like effort and more like habit. This is where endurance lived, not in strength, in repetition. The heat builds again just as it did before, pressing slowly into your clothes and skin, but instead of reacting, you respond almost automatically, pulling your hat lower, adjusting your bandana, easing your shoulders, conserving energy in ways that feel instinctive rather than deliberate. Cowboys who lasted on the trail were not necessarily the strongest or the fastest, but the ones who learned how to shape their behavior around the environment, turning survival into routine rather than challenge. You notice how your breathing stays steady now, how your movements remain controlled, how even the smallest adjustments happen at the right moment, not too early, not too late, and you realize that this is what adaptation truly looks like. Not dramatic change, but quiet consistency built over time. Interestingly, some historians suggest that many cowboy skills were less about formal training and more about repeated exposure, learning through doing, through watching, through gradually refining actions until they became second nature. Though others argue that experienced trail bosses played a larger role in teaching these habits directly, standing here now, it feels like both are true, because while guidance exists, understanding only comes through experience. You feel it in your body, in your timing, in your awareness. The herd moves steadily, and you guide them without conscious effort. Your attention shifting smoothly between tasks, adjusting position, maintaining spacing, responding to subtle changes before they become problems. There is no urgency in your movements now, only precision. The sun climbs higher and the heat follows, but it no longer feels like an opponent to overcome, more like a condition to work within, something constant, something expected, something that shapes your actions without dominating them. You conserve energy without thinking about it. You pace yourself naturally. You notice the small things again, the way the ground changes beneath your horse's hooves, the faint movement of air, the subtle signals from the herd, and each observation feeds into your actions without delay, creating a flow that feels continuous, uninterrupted by hesitation or doubt. Historians still debate how quickly cowboys adapted to these conditions, with some accounts suggesting a steep learning curve for newcomers, while others describe a more gradual process shaped by time and repetition. From where you sit now, it feels like something that cannot be rushed, something that settles into you layer by layer, day by day. You don't become prepared all at once. You become prepared slowly. The heat deepens the air, dries, the dust rises, and yet your body continues to move within it. Not fighting, not resisting, simply adjusting, maintaining that careful balance that allows you to continue without unnecessary strain. You take a measured sip of water without needing to think about it. Your timing already aligned with your needs. Everything feels connected. Your actions, your environment, your awareness, all working together. The sun holds its place in the sky, the land stretches endlessly ahead, and the rhythm continues steady and unbroken. And within that rhythm you find a kind of quiet stability. Not comfort exactly, but something close to it, something that allows you to exist within the heat without being consumed by it. And as you ride forward, your movements smooth, your awareness steady, your body working in quiet harmony with the demands of the day, you realize something that feels simple but deeply earned. Out here, survival isn't about learning once. It's about becoming. The day draws slowly toward its close once more, and as the light begins to soften across the land, you feel that familiar easing settle into your body. Not sudden, not dramatic, but steady, like a quiet release after hours of holding tension you barely noticed while it was there. And as you ride alongside the herd, you realize how much has changed within you, without ever announcing itself clearly. The heat is still present. The dust still lifts beneath each step. The horizon still stretches endlessly ahead. And yet your experience of it all feels different now, less like something you endure, and more like something you move through with understanding. You no longer chase comfort, you create balance. The sun lowers, casting long shadows that stretch across the ground, and you watch how those shadows move with the herd, with your horse with you. A quiet reminder that time has been passing all along, even when it felt suspended in the stillness of heat. You adjust your posture once more, not because you have to, but because it feels natural. Your body responding without effort, guided by habits that have settled deep beneath conscious thought. Cowboys who survived these conditions were not immune to the heat, not untouched by exhaustion or strain, but they learned how to live alongside it, how to shape their actions in ways that reduced its impact, how to listen to their bodies, their animals, and the land itself. Though historians still debate how much of this understanding was instinctive versus taught, passed through quiet observation rather than formal instruction, you feel that understanding now, not as knowledge, but as rhythm. The herd begins to slow, settling into the evening with a calm that mirrors your own, and you guide them gently, no longer needing to think through each movement, your hand steady, your attention wide but relaxed. The air cools, gradually carrying with it that faint earthy scent once again, and you take a slow breath, letting it settle into your chest as the last of the day's heat begins to drift away. Everything softens, bit by bit. You dismount when the time feels right, your boots meeting the ground with a quiet familiarity, and you move through the motions of evening without urgency, loosening your gear, checking your supplies, preparing for rest, in the same steady way you have before, but now with a deeper sense of ease. The ground beneath you still holds warmth, but it no longer feels overwhelming, just a lingering trace of the day that has passed. You sit for a moment looking out across the open land, and you notice how your thoughts have changed, no longer circling around discomfort or effort, but settling into something quieter, something more reflective, as if the constant adjustments you've made throughout the day have created a space where stillness can exist without tension. Historians still argue about how cowboys themselves describe this life, whether they saw it as hardship, routine, or something in between. But sitting here now, it feels less like a single definition and more like a series of moments, each one shaped by the same elements: heat-dust movement and the quiet decisions that carry you from one hour to the next. You lie back slowly, the sky above opening once again into that wide, endless expanse, and the first stars begin to appear faint at first, then stronger, filling the space with a kind of calm that feels earned rather than given. The air cools further, brushing gently across your skin, and you feel your body begin to release what it has been holding, the tension fading, the effort dissolving. You breathe deeply, slowly, easily. And in that moment, with the day behind you and the night settling in, you understand something that has been building quietly all along, something that no single lesson could fully explain. Out here, survival is not a single act. It is a collection of small choices, repeated, refined, remembered, until they become part of you. And as the sounds of the land soften, the movement fades, and the warmth of the ground slowly gives way to the cool of night, you let your eyes close. Your breathing steady, your body at rest, carried gently into stillness by the rhythm you've learned to follow. The desert no longer feels like something you face. It feels like something you understand, and in that understanding you finally rest. Word count 1157. As the night deepens, everything around you seems to quiet even further, the sounds thinning into soft, distant traces, the air cooling in slow, gentle layers that wrap around you without urgency, and you feel yourself drifting not suddenly but gradually, as if the land itself is guiding you toward rest after a long, measured day. The warmth that once pressed so firmly against your skin has faded into memory, replaced by a calm that settles into your muscles, your breath, your thoughts, and you notice how easy it is now to let go of the constant awareness you carried, the careful adjustments, the quiet vigilance. Your body knows what to do. It slows, it softens, it rests. The ground beneath you feels steady and reassuring, holding just enough warmth to feel comfortable while the air above remains cool and open, creating a balance that feels almost intentional, as if the desert, for all its harshness, understands the need for this moment of peace. You take one more slow breath, deep and unforced, and let it settle, fully feeling the last traces of the day dissolve into the quiet rhythm of night. Nothing demands your attention now, nothing pulls you forward. The stars stretch endlessly above, silent and steady, and though you may not be looking at them anymore, you feel their presence vast and calm, a reminder that time continues gently, without pressure, without urgency. And as you drift further into that stillness, your thoughts easing, your body fully at rest, you carry with you the quiet understanding you've gained, not as something you need to hold on to, but as something that now holds you, softly, steadily, without effort. Sweet dreams.